What if I told you something entered our solar system that no one could explain? Something that moved faster than any natural object we've ever seen, came from a direction no one expected, and left before we could even understand what it was. For a few brief weeks in 2017, telescopes around the world caught sight of something that didn't belong. It wasn't a comet, it wasn't an asteroid, and it wasn't anything we had ever seen before. Scientists named it Oumuamua, a word meaning scout or messenger in Hawaiian, but the name didn't make it less strange. In fact, it made it sound even more deliberate. Oumuamua behaved like it had a mind of its own. It accelerated as it left the sun, twisting and tumbling in a way that didn't match any known physical model. It didn't emit gas or vapor like a comet, but it shimmered faintly as though reflecting light off a smooth metallic surface. Astronomers calculated that it came from deep interstellar space, the first confirmed object from outside our solar system ever detected. That alone was shocking enough. But what truly terrified scientists wasn't that it came, it was how it came. The trajectory was almost intentional, like it was steering. And when Harvard astrophysicist Avi Loeb suggested it might be an alien probe, a remnant or fragment of something designed, the world laughed. Until the data started to suggest he might not be wrong. Every scan, every simulation, every recalculated model pointed toward one truth. Oumuamua was different. It was the kind of object that rewrote the rules of what we thought we knew about space. And then, just as quickly as it appeared, it was gone, leaving behind more questions than answers. But here's the thing. Oumuamua may not have been alone. When the first images of Oumuamua appeared, most astronomers didn't even realize what they were looking at. At first, it was logged as just another faint streak of light, one of thousands of small rocks drifting through the darkness. But when the numbers came in, the data didn't add up. Its speed, its angle, its brightness, none of it made sense. This wasn't something orbiting the sun in a normal, elliptical path like a planet or a comet. It was slicing through our solar system on a hyperbolic trajectory, meaning it came from somewhere far beyond and would never return. We were witnessing something no human civilization had ever seen before, a traveler from another star system. At first, scientists thought it might be a comet ejected from a distant solar system. That would explain its strange speed. But comets, even the faintest ones, give off gas and dust as they heat up when approaching the sun. Oumuamua didn't. It was completely dry. It reflected sunlight, yes, but not like ice or rock. Its reflection was uneven, almost metallic, as if the surface had been polished or made of panels. As telescopes tracked it, the light it gave off flickered rapidly, bright, then dim, then bright again. This meant the object was rotating, but not smoothly. It was tumbling chaotically, end over end, like a piece of debris spinning in zero gravity. Every few hours, it would flash at exactly the same rate, 7.3 hours per rotation. Some dismissed that as coincidence. Others couldn't ignore that it was too consistent to be random. If this object had been floating in the void for millions of years, hit by countless micrometeorites, pulled by gravity and scorched by radiation, how could it maintain such perfect rhythm? It was as if something inside it was stabilizing its motion, like an old satellite still trying to orient itself long after its mission ended. As more data came in, the mystery deepened. The Pan-STARRS telescope in Hawaii tracked its path, and what they found was unsettling. The object wasn't simply coasting under gravity's pull, it was accelerating. Just a little, but enough to notice. Natural objects don't do that. If it were a comet, gas jets releasing from its surface could explain the boost, but Oumuamua had no visible emissions, no cometary tail, no heat signature. It was just speeding up on its own. To scientists, that was almost impossible. To storytellers and dreamers, it sounded like something out of science fiction. A lost probe, a relic of a long-dead civilization, still cruising through the stars. The kind of thing we imagined when we looked up at the night sky and wondered if anyone else was out there. But even within the scientific community, the unease grew. Astronomers calculated that Oumuamua had entered the solar system from a very specific direction, roughly the same region of space where the star Vega sits in the constellation Lyra. Vega is relatively close by cosmic standards, about 25 light-years away, but Oumuamua couldn't have come directly from Vega, because by the time it would have passed there, the star wouldn't have been in that position millions of years ago. So where did it really come from? Some researchers proposed it was a fragment, a shard ejected from a disintegrating planet orbiting another star. But for a chunk of rock to survive the violent birth of another system, drift through interstellar space for millions of years, and then just happen to enter ours at the perfect angle to be detected, the odds were astronomical. It was as if we'd been chosen to see it. For a brief moment, humanity was unified by a single haunting question. Was Oumuamua a message? The shape alone fueled the fire. Based on the way it reflected light, scientists deduced it had to be extremely elongated, up to 10 times longer than it was wide. Imagine something the size of a skyscraper but shaped like a thin, flat cigar, or maybe even like a flattened disc. It was the strangest object ever recorded in the cosmos, and if that shape sounds familiar, that's because it matched what many of our own designs for interstellar probes might look like. Thin, reflective, efficient for catching light and using it as propulsion. That's when Avi Loeb stepped into the picture. Loeb, a professor at Harvard and one of the most respected astrophysicists in the world, publicly proposed what others were too nervous to say aloud. He suggested that Oumuamua might be artificial, a piece of technology, perhaps a light sail powered by starlight, drifting between stars long after its makers were gone. His peers called it sensationalism. They said he was chasing headlines. But Loeb wasn't guessing. He was following the math. The acceleration pattern matched what a thin, reflective object would experience if it were being gently pushed by radiation from the sun. In other words, exactly what a light sail would do. Still, no one could prove it. By the time the telescopes had fully locked onto it, Oumuamua was already leaving, accelerating into the void at nearly 200,000 miles per hour. We had caught a glimpse of something extraordinary, and then it was gone forever. No spacecraft could catch up. No probe could intercept it. It came, it baffled us, and it disappeared. But the story didn't end there. In fact, that was only the beginning, because Oumuamua's arrival changed everything. It forced scientists to admit that our universe might be full of travelers, objects wandering between stars, carrying the histories of places we'll never see. For some, it reignited a sense of wonder. For others, it was unsettling proof that we might not be as alone as we think. And then, just as the excitement started to fade, something else happened. 8 years later, astronomers detected another interstellar visitor. It was bigger, brighter, and moving along a strangely familiar path. For many, it was simply another cosmic coincidence. But for those who had studied Oumuamua, it felt like something else, like the next chapter of a story that had only just begun. Back in 2017, most people didn't realize how historic that first detection was. We've spent decades scanning the skies, mapping exoplanets, and searching for signs of life, but never had we actually seen something from another system enter our own. The moment we did, it rewrote the rules of planetary science. It forced us to confront the possibility that we might one day find evidence not just of alien life, but of alien artifacts. And that idea, an ancient silent traveler crossing billions of miles to drift through our neighborhood, haunted scientists for years afterward. Oumuamua became a symbol, a ghost of technology, or maybe just a fluke of nature so rare that it looked engineered. But what unsettled people wasn't what it was what it meant. If something could enter our solar system from deep space once, it could happen again. Maybe it already had, and we just hadn't noticed. Maybe Oumuamua wasn't the first of its kind, just the first we were finally able to see. Astronomers started re-examining old telescope data, hunting for other strange movements or unexplained orbits. They combed through archives, ran simulations, and launched new surveys dedicated to catching the next one in real time. Humanity had opened a door, and no one could close it again. The silence of space suddenly felt less like emptiness and more like anticipation, because if Oumuamua was indeed a messenger, what was it trying to say? Was it a probe that had drifted off course? A piece of something larger? Or was it just an ancient relic from a civilization that no longer existed? Its purpose long forgotten, but its path still true. Whatever it was, it had already changed us. We had seen the impossible, and we could never unsee it. The universe had sent us a question wrapped in silence, and it was up to us to find the answer. 8 years after Oumuamua vanished into the darkness, the silence of space was broken again. In early 2025, astronomers detected another object cutting through the solar system, moving in a way that triggered an eerie sense of déjà vu. It wasn't identical, but there were enough similarities that even the most skeptical voices went quiet. They called it 3IATLAS, an interstellar object much larger than Oumuamua and far more visible. Unlike the first one, this new visitor didn't sneak by unnoticed. It announced itself in the night sky, bright and slow enough to study, as if daring us to look closer. The first data showed it was big, maybe 10 kilometers wide, almost as massive as Mount Everest. That alone made it extraordinary. Oumuamua had been small, fragile, easy to miss. But this one was colossal, like a mountain drifting through infinity, and its brightness wasn't steady. It flickered like a dying ember, fading and flaring unpredictably. For the world's astronomers, this wasn't just another visitor. It was a mystery that felt almost intentional, as if the universe had decided to give us a second chance. From the moment it was discovered, the comparisons began. Oumuamua had moved too fast and acted too strangely to fit our models. Atlas was slower, but it shared one unmistakable trait. It wasn't following the expected gravitational path. Once again, the object showed subtle, unexplainable acceleration. There were no gas jets, no visible tail, no evidence of natural propulsion, and yet it drifted off its predicted course like something under control. The scientific community tried to stay calm. They remembered the chaos of 2017, the wild headlines, the alien probe theories, the late-night talk shows turning complex astrophysics into meme material. This time they wanted to handle it differently, but you can't control the internet, and once the images started circulating, speculation took off like wildfire. Some said it was another interstellar rock, others said it was debris from a destroyed world, but a few whispered something stranger, maybe Oumuamua had never been alone. To the public, it sounded dramatic, but to the scientists watching the data, it wasn't a joke. The timing was too perfect. 8 years apart. Two objects both from interstellar space, both behaving in ways nature couldn't easily explain. It was like a message written in cosmic intervals, one we didn't yet know how to read. And what unsettled everyone most wasn't just what they saw, it was what they couldn't explain away. When they analyzed the light signature of 3IATLAS, it didn't behave like a normal comet. The spectrum showed dust, yes, but not the gas that should have produced that dust. It looked like it was shedding material, yet no sublimation process was detected. In other words, it was leaking without melting. Imagine watching a car leave a trail of smoke, but realizing the engine was cold. The data simply didn't fit. And then came another puzzle, the dust grains themselves. They weren't behaving randomly. They seemed to cluster and disperse rhythmically, as if controlled by pulses or vibrations. A few researchers at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory proposed that electromagnetic forces could be playing a role, perhaps due to unusual metallic content. But others weren't so sure. If Oumuamua had hinted at technology, Atlas practically shouted it. It was massive, reflective and behaving with precision. The more they looked, the more it seemed to defy coincidence. That's when people started revisiting an old theory, the scout theory. The idea that Oumuamua had been a forerunner, something sent ahead to scan or observe, while the true arrival came later. It was a concept most dismissed as science fiction back in 2017, but now it didn't feel so ridiculous. If the first object was smaller, lighter, almost like a sensor or probe, and the second was huge, deliberate and slower, what if one was signaling the other? Some astronomers began noticing something chilling. Atlas seemed to be following a trajectory that crossed the same orbital plane Oumuamua had traveled through years before. Not perfectly aligned, but close enough to suggest a relationship, and as it approached perihelion, the point nearest to the Sun, it began behaving even more strangely. Instead of disintegrating or flaring like a comet, it stabilized. Its brightness became steady, and for several hours its motion seemed almost guided, as if correcting itself. Natural objects don't correct themselves. But maybe that was just an illusion, some said. Space is unpredictable. Light curves can be deceptive. We see patterns because we want to see them. Still, others weren't convinced. By now, software and telescopes were far more advanced than they'd been. We had AI-driven observation networks, automated light curve analyzers, and near real-time global data feeds. Thousands of amateur astronomers were recording and uploading their own observations, feeding the global conversation with every new discovery. The truth was no longer in the hands of a few institutions. It was open to anyone who knew where to look. and what they saw was unsettling. As 3IATLAS passed near the sun, it gave off a distinct pulse of light, an irregular flicker that repeated every 11 hours. It wasn't a signal in the conventional sense, not radio or laser, just a flicker, a modulation of brightness, like a heartbeat echoing through the void. Most said it was a natural artifact, a rotation pattern combined with reflective geometry, but others couldn't shake the feeling that the universe was blinking back at us. For Avi Loeb, who had become somewhat of an outsider in the astrophysics community after his book Extraterrestrial, it felt like vindication. He had spent years defending the idea that Oumuamua could have been an alien artifact, and now here was another object behaving in nearly the same way. Loeb called it the second whisper, and warned that humanity was too arrogant to assume coincidence. He argued that our civilization is like an isolated island tribe, watching a steel ship glide by and insisting it must be a floating log. To him, Atlas was the ship. The scientific world pushed back, of course. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. But this time, Loeb wasn't alone. Younger researchers, raised in an era where AI and quantum physics had already rewritten what was possible, were less dismissive. They formed online communities, analyzing open-source data, running simulations, and debating possibilities in real time. They weren't asking whether it was alien, they were asking how to find out. Meanwhile, something else began to unfold. As Atlas drifted closer to the inner solar system, strange fluctuations appeared in nearby electromagnetic readings. Nothing strong enough to be a signal, more like interference. It was as if the object was interacting with solar radiation in ways we didn't fully understand. One observatory in Chile reported faint radio anomalies whenever the object passed through certain magnetic regions. Another team in Japan detected subtle polarization shifts, almost like the object was manipulating light rather than merely reflecting it. It could have been coincidence. It could have been equipment noise, or maybe, just maybe, it was something deliberate. And the public, as always, was divided. Social media lit up with theories, some ridiculous, others hauntingly plausible. Videos claiming the return of the messenger trended for weeks. People began connecting patterns, comparing flight paths, drawing maps of invisible trajectories. Conspiracy forums buzzed with claims that governments knew more than they were saying, that probes were being launched to intercept the object. NASA and ESA both denied such missions existed, but documents later revealed that internal discussions had, in fact, taken place. There were contingency plans for what to do if the object changed direction, or worse, slowed down. Because if it could slow down, that meant it wasn't just passing through. When Atlas finally began its outbound journey, moving back toward the edges of the solar system, it left behind a cloud of dust that puzzled everyone. The particles seemed to be arranged in an almost geometric formation, thin and evenly spaced, like a pattern you might see in diffraction experiments. To some, it was random chaos. To others, it was data, a final fingerprint left behind by something that didn't want to be forgotten. Even now, years later, the debates rage on. Was Atlas another natural wanderer from a distant system? Or was it the next in a sequence, part of something bigger than we can comprehend? What made it even stranger was what happened after it left. Weeks later, a small burst of unexplained radio noise was detected coming from the same region of space where Atlas had passed. It wasn't a continuous signal, just a brief structured pulse, lasting less than a second, random static, according to some. But the timing was perfect, almost too perfect. Whatever Atlas was, it left humanity staring at the stars with a familiar feeling, wonder mixed with unease. Maybe we were never meant to understand it. Maybe these visitors are ancient relics, drifting endlessly through the void, remnants of civilizations long extinct. Or maybe, just maybe, they are something far more deliberate. Something watching, something waiting. And if Oumuamua was the scout, then perhaps Atlas wasn't just the next visitor. Maybe it was the confirmation, the proof that the first one hadn't been an accident at all. Long before we ever reached the stars, humanity sent scouts of its own. Wooden ships with torn sails once crossed oceans that seemed endless, searching for lands that may or may not have existed. They were fragile, slow, and easily lost. Yet they carried something powerful: curiosity. The same force that drove explorers across uncharted waters is what drives our telescopes to scan the infinite black today. It's a strange kind of symmetry, what we once did on Earth, we may now be witnessing in the sky above us. That's why many people began to see Oumuamua and Atlas not just as cosmic debris, but as scouts sent ahead by something else. And if that idea seems too far-fetched, consider this. Every major civilization in human history has done the exact same thing. We always send the smallest, fastest, most expendable vessel first. A messenger, a probe, a scout. The first explorers of the ancient world didn't launch fleets immediately. They sent 1 or 2 ships to test the winds, to map the currents, to see if the journey was even survivable. Only after that came the great expeditions. That's what made the pattern of Oumuamua and Atlas feel eerily familiar. The first one was small, quick, light, almost invisible. It slipped in and out before anyone could truly react. The second was slower, larger, more deliberate. The sequence mirrored the logic of exploration. You don't risk your main fleet until you're sure the destination is safe. You send something expendable first, something that can gather information, transmit it home, and prepare the way. When you look at it through that lens, Oumuamua's behavior starts to make sense. Its strange acceleration, its deliberate path, even its reflective surface, it could all fit the design of a reconnaissance probe, something meant to observe rather than communicate, to measure rather than interact. It came in close enough to study us, to record our star, and then it left without a trace. For centuries, we've done the same with our own machines. We've sent drones to Mars, satellites to the outer planets, and probes beyond the edge of our solar system. Voyager, Pioneer, New Horizons, they all carry messages, data, and signals back to their creators. Maybe Oumuamua was someone else's Voyager, built long before we existed, still wandering long after its mission ended. And then, years later, came Atlas, the kind of object that changes everything. Its size, its timing, its behavior, they all suggested something following in the footsteps of the first. Some astronomers noticed that the distance between the 2 arrivals, 8 years, was almost precisely the amount of time it would take for data from Oumuamua to reach a civilization within a certain range, and for that civilization to send something back. If Oumuamua had transmitted data when it passed by our star, the reply would arrive right about now. A chilling thought: what if Atlas wasn't random at all, but a response? Human history is built on this exact rhythm: exploration, report, return. When the Polynesians navigated the Pacific, they sent single canoes first, guided by stars and memory. When those scouts returned safely, they came back with others, larger vessels, carrying more people, more tools, more intent. Oumuamua's visit had always been described as a coincidence, a once-in-a-lifetime event. But what if it was part of a cycle? What if it wasn't a visitor, but an invitation? Of course, science demands evidence, and there's no proof that Oumuamua or Atlas were anything but natural. But what unsettled even the most rational minds wasn't proof. It was pattern. Nature doesn't often repeat itself so precisely. The odds of 2 interstellar objects being detected within a decade, both showing unexplained acceleration, both reflecting sunlight in unnatural ways, are astronomically small, and yet it happened twice. That's when the scout analogy stopped being a fringe idea and started creeping into serious discussion. Some researchers began drawing parallels between cosmic exploration and human expansion. Every empire we've ever known followed the same pattern: reconnaissance, observation, contact, and then arrival. Not always hostile, not always peaceful, but always curious. If we've done this every time we've found new land, why assume others wouldn't do the same? Curiosity isn't unique to us. It's universal. It's the engine of intelligence. Imagine this. Millions of years ago, somewhere far beyond our reach, a civilization watched its own night sky and wondered if it was alone. Maybe it built a probe, powered by light or gravity or something we can't yet imagine. It sent that probe drifting through the void, not to invade, but to observe. Maybe that's all Oumuamua was, a relic of curiosity from a civilization that might not even exist anymore. And if that civilization had once built such technology, then it's not impossible that others still do. Maybe 3IATLAS wasn't from the same builders. Maybe it was from someone else who found the first one, studied it, and decided to follow. That's the terrifying beauty of deep space. It's so old, so vast, that stories can overlap across millions of years. Artifacts can drift from one civilization to another like messages in bottles, carried by cosmic tides. We might just be reading the middle chapter of a story that began long before us. Oumuamua could have been launched before Earth even had life. Atlas could have been built by a species that discovered it halfway through its journey. When you think about it that way, we're not witnesses to an event. We're participants in a chain reaction of discovery stretching across time itself. But even beyond speculation, the data itself was haunting. Astronomers noticed that as Atlas approached the Sun, its path curved slightly, just as Oumuamua's had, though under different conditions. It seemed to maneuver, not actively, not deliberately, but subtly, as though reacting to something unseen. One researcher described it as graceful deflection, like a leaf catching a gust of wind. But what if that gust was intentional? What if Atlas wasn't drifting, but adjusting? The more people studied the data, the more the scout theory began to feel plausible, not as a wild fantasy, but as a metaphor that fit too perfectly to ignore. Humanity was staring at its own reflection in the stars. We were the islanders watching a ship pass by for the first time, unsure whether to wave or hide. And deep down we knew that if there were scouts, there could also be fleets. Not of war, perhaps, but of knowledge. Civilizations expanding outward not to conquer but to understand. After all, exploration is rarely about power alone. It's about curiosity, connection, and survival. The need to know what's out there is woven into the DNA of every intelligent species. So what happens if that same impulse exists elsewhere? Maybe somewhere in the galaxy a civilization sent its scouts long ago, expecting to find nothing but dust and silence. And then, one day, one of those scouts passed through our system and saw light. Cities, radio waves, movement. Maybe Oumuamua was never meant to reach us. Maybe it was simply programmed to observe any system with signs of complexity. And when it detected ours, it recorded, transmitted, and left. Atlas could then be what follows, the follow-up mission. Slower, heavier, designed not to scan, but to watch. And yet, there's another possibility, one that's even more unsettling. What if these objects aren't scouts from another civilization at all, but part of a much older mechanism, something ancient and automated, still functioning long after its creators vanished? We've already sent probes beyond our solar system that will outlive our species. 1 billion years from now, they could pass through someone else's world, their engravings still intact, their data long silent. Maybe that's what Oumuamua was to us, a time capsule from someone who never intended to be found. Whether intentional or not, the effect is the same. We're being watched by our own reflection. Oumuamua was the spark. Atlas was the echo. And if the scout theory is true, then the next one may not just pass through. It might slow down. It might change direction. It might arrive. That's the thought that keeps astronomers awake at night. The pattern is there. The sequence has started. And the only question that remains is what comes next. Every mystery eventually collapses into physics. No matter how strange, how poetic, or how frightening something appears, the numbers must still make sense. And that's where Oumuamua broke every rule we thought we understood. Its behavior wasn't just strange, it was physically impossible, at least by the standards of natural motion. When scientists ran the simulations, they discovered that nothing about its path matched any known class of object. It didn't orbit, it didn't decelerate properly, and it didn't spin the way rocks or ice normally do. It was as though it had written its own law of motion, one that ignored the sun's authority. Most comets and asteroids follow elliptical paths governed by gravity. They come in close, swing around, and then drift back out, their orbits predictable to the second. Oumuamua didn't do that. As it passed near the sun, it should have slowed ever so slightly, pulled inward by the sun's gravity, and then escaped on a clean trajectory. Instead, it sped up, a tiny increase in velocity, just enough to shatter the equations. It was as though it had an engine that no one could see. At first, the logical mind stepped forward. Maybe, they said, it was outgassing ice trapped beneath the surface suddenly vaporizing as it warmed, giving it a little push. But if that were true, we'd have seen jets of gas, or at least a faint cometary tail. There was none. The object stayed perfectly dry. And that wasn't all. The acceleration wasn't random. It was smooth and consistent, as if guided by design rather than accident. Outgassing would have caused jerky, uneven bursts, changing the rotation and wobbling its path. Oumuamua's movement was steady, almost graceful. The numbers mocked us. Its acceleration rate matched what a thin reflective sheet would experience if sunlight itself were pushing it, a phenomenon known as radiation pressure. It's the same concept engineers use when designing solar sails, spacecraft that harness photons for propulsion. But Oumuamua wasn't a sail. It wasn't even flat enough to fit that model completely, unless of course what we saw was just the wreckage of something larger, something that once had structure, now fragmented by eons of travel. That's when Avi Loeb made his move. He didn't just suggest Oumuamua was artificial, he put equations behind the claim. The physics, he said, matched a light sail only a fraction of a millimeter thick, something engineered for long-distance travel using starlight alone. It wouldn't need fuel, it wouldn't need engines, just time, and patience measured in millennia. The idea sent shockwaves through the scientific community. Some called it bold, others called it madness. But the numbers didn't care what anyone believed. They just sat there stubborn and undeniable. And then came the shape. The way Oumuamua reflected light told another impossible story. Its brightness changed tenfold every rotation, implying an object at least 10 times longer than it was wide, something no asteroid or comet had ever been known to be. Natural rocks in space tend to be roughly round or potato-shaped. But Oumuamua, if the data were correct, was more like a flattened pancake or a long needle-like shard. Imagine a metallic plank, spinning end over end, slicing through the void. No crater, no debris, no companion fragments, just a solitary traveller built like nothing nature could produce. And yet, the deeper we looked, the more contradictions appeared. If it was a thin object pushed by light, it should have been much lighter than rock, maybe even hollow. But if it was hollow, how had it survived the violence of interstellar travel? Cosmic radiation, collisions, gravitational shear. Space destroys fragile things, unless it wasn't fragile at all, unless it was built for this. Even its rotation was bizarre. Most tumbling bodies in space slow down or stabilize over time. Oumuamua didn't. Its spin remained locked in an almost perfect rhythm, 7.3 hours per full rotation, steady and unwavering. The precision was unsettling. Random debris doesn't behave like that. It's like finding a bottle adrift in the ocean, still corked after 1,000 years, and realizing the message inside is untouched. Scientists began searching for natural explanations that could account for such perfection. One theory suggested it was made of hydrogen ice, invisible to our instruments as it sublimated into space. But hydrogen ice can't survive interstellar temperatures. It would have evaporated long before reaching us. Another theory said maybe it was a nitrogen fragment from a shattered exoplanet. But even that couldn't explain the acceleration pattern or the perfect reflectivity. Every answer collapsed under its own weight. Every model failed. It was almost as if the object had been designed to remain ambiguous, just plausible enough to deny belief, but too strange to dismiss entirely. That tension is what made Oumuamua so haunting. It wasn't proof of anything, but it was evidence of everything, a mirror reflecting both science and imagination, daring us to tell the difference. Then came the twist no one expected. 3IATLAS, years later, began showing similar defiance toward physics. Different size, different speed, same violation of gravity's grip. When it passed near the sun, it too experienced a faint but measurable acceleration. The pattern wasn't identical, but it was eerily familiar. Lightning had struck twice, and this time the object was large enough to observe in exquisite detail. High-resolution imaging showed that Atlas's dust emission was irregular, almost digital in its timing. Dust particles left in evenly spaced bursts, as though synchronized by some hidden rhythm. Yet there was no measurable heat to drive that emission. If it wasn't outgassing, what was it? Some suggested electrostatic repulsion, the result of solar radiation interacting with conductive material. That might explain the pulsating glow, the magnetic anomalies, even the stable rotation. But it didn't explain the geometry. The object's outline, blurred through telescopic diffraction, seemed unnervingly smooth. Not jagged, not cratered. Smooth, like engineered metal weathered by eternity. Still, no one wanted to say it aloud. The moment you mention technology, you lose credibility. But in private, among data analysts and orbital modelers, whispers spread. Could two interstellar objects, arriving within a decade, both defy gravitational prediction? Both exhibit anomalous acceleration, and both display properties consistent with radiation pressure. The statistical likelihood was nearly zero. Nature doesn't copy itself that neatly. The more physicists tried to explain away the impossible, the more impossible it became. Some even proposed that we were witnessing a new class of object, something between asteroid and comet, a hybrid forged in alien environments. But even that didn't satisfy the equations. If the objects were made of exotic materials, we'd detect their spectral signatures. We didn't. Their composition remained maddeningly neutral, neither metallic nor rocky, nor icy, just blank, like they were meant to hide. That's when the conversation turned to intent. What if the impossible physics wasn't a mistake in our calculations, but a feature, a disguise, a mechanism designed to make the object appear natural until it wasn't? The thought lingered in the scientific subconscious. If you wanted to send something through hostile space without drawing attention, you'd build it to look like a rock. You'd give it the perfect camouflage appearances of randomness hiding perfect control. Even now, the math refuses to behave. Every year, new simulations run on faster supercomputers, and each one returns the same answer. Oumuamua and Atlas moved in ways gravity alone can't explain. Something else influenced them, something we don't yet understand. Maybe it's physics we haven't discovered. Maybe it's technology we can't replicate. Or maybe the two are the same thing. The universe has always revealed its secrets through anomalies. X-rays, relativity, quantum theory, each began as an observation that didn't fit. Maybe these interstellar visitors are the next anomaly, the next key. If so, we're standing at the threshold of a discovery that could redefine our place in the cosmos. But to step through that threshold, we have to accept a terrifying truth. Not everything impossible is wrong. Sometimes the impossible is just unfamiliar, and so the scientists continue to watch the skies, their equations trembling on the edge of revelation. Somewhere out there beyond the light of our sun, two objects are still traveling. One small and silent, one vast and luminous, each defying the gravity that binds everything else. Maybe they're just stones shaped by the chaos of creation. Or maybe they're something else entirely, moving according to laws written by minds older than stars. Whatever they are, they've already broken one law, the law that says the universe doesn't notice us. Because now it feels like it does. When people first began calling Oumuamua a messenger, it was supposed to be poetic. No one actually meant it literally. But the longer scientists studied it, the more the name started to feel uncomfortably accurate. For something so small and so silent, it communicated far more through its behavior than its presence. Every flicker, every twist, every inexplicable burst of acceleration seemed like part of a pattern, a rhythm that hinted at something deeper than random motion. Some called it coincidence, others called it a signal. From the beginning, Oumuamua's rotation was peculiar. It tumbled through space in a complex non-principal spin, a motion known as chaotic tumbling, but buried within that chaos was order. As astronomers tracked its brightness, they noticed a repeating fluctuation every 7 hours and 12 minutes. It was the same pattern again and again, perfectly timed, unwavering even as the object sped away. To most scientists, it was simply a rotation rate. To a smaller, quieter group, it was a beat, an interval that felt deliberate, like the tick of a cosmic clock. The first person to suggest it could be a form of transmission was not a conspiracy theorist, but a data analyst working for an observatory in Spain. He noticed that the intervals of Oumuamua's light curve weren't perfectly symmetrical. They deviated slightly, fractions of a second here and there, but those deviations followed a strange pattern that almost looked binary. 10011001. He ran the data through every algorithm he had, and it didn't match any known natural cause. Not asteroid spin, not reflection variance, not observation error. It was as if someone or something was modulating the light. When he published his findings quietly on an academic forum, most ignored it. But Avi Loeb didn't. Loeb reached out, studied the data, and admitted that while there was no proof of artificiality, there was also no reason to dismiss the possibility. He reminded everyone that humanity had already done the same thing. In 1974, we sent the Arecibo message toward the M13 star cluster, a binary-coded radio transmission carrying information about our species, our solar system, and our DNA. If we did it, why wouldn't others? The difference, of course, is that our signal was deliberate. Oumuamua's supposed signal wasn't clear at all. It wasn't radio, microwave, or optical in the traditional sense. It was embedded in motion, hidden in rotation, coded in flicker. It was, if it existed at all, the most subtle form of communication imaginable. Something only another observer would recognize. Maybe it wasn't meant for us. Maybe it was broadcasting to something else entirely, and we just happened to intercept the afterglow. As the object drifted farther away, efforts to detect any radio emissions intensified. Dozens of observatories pointed their dishes toward its vanishing trajectory. The Breakthrough Listen initiative, one of the world's most advanced programs for detecting extraterrestrial signals, dedicated hours of telescope time to scanning Oumuamua's location. They detected nothing. No beacons, no pulses, no artificial frequencies. But absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. And the idea of a physical signal, encoded not in transmission, but in behavior, kept resurfacing. For instance, Oumuamua's brightness didn't vary randomly. Each flash corresponded to a specific angle of rotation, but the amplitude of those flashes seemed to change in a cycle, like a modulation envelope. In other words, it wasn't just spinning, it was performing. The sequence was too clean to be random noise, but too erratic to be a simple reflection. It reminded some of the way early satellites used light pulses for communication before radio became efficient. A beam, a mirror, a pattern. Simple, elegant, and almost untraceable, unless you knew what to look for. As years passed, most dismissed the theory as wishful thinking. But then in 2025, when 3IATLAS arrived, the same pattern reappeared, this time more pronounced. The object's brightness fluctuated at 11-hour intervals, repeating in cycles that weren't purely rotational. Scientists described it as quasi-periodic modulation, which is a polite way of saying, we have no idea why it's doing that. But what made it eerie was that the peaks and troughs of its light curve mirrored, almost proportionally, the pattern observed in Oumuamua years earlier. Not identical, but close enough to feel intentional. When Loeb compared the two, he noticed that if you superimposed one light curve over the other and adjusted for speed and scale, the peaks aligned, like matching fingerprints of two devices built by the same hand. To most scientists, that was still coincidence. To others, it was something else. Continuity. If Oumuamua was the scout, maybe Atlas was the relay, the follow-up, the signal that said message received. Around that same time, a team in Japan began picking up faint radio anomalies coinciding with Atlas's perihelion pass, the point when it was closest to the Sun. These weren't transmissions in the usual sense. They were brief, irregular spikes across multiple frequencies, lasting less than a second each. The pattern repeated every 11 hours, exactly matching Atlas's rotation cycle. Natural emissions, they said at first. Plasma noise. But plasma doesn't modulate rhythmically. Something was turning it on and off. The story leaked online before the data was peer-reviewed, and suddenly the internet was ablaze with theories. Some claimed Atlas was a dying beacon, repeating a message until its power ran out. Others believed it was a machine scanning the sun, using solar radiation as fuel. But the most haunting theory came from a linguist who had studied pattern recognition in communication systems. He noticed that both Oumuamua and Atlas exhibited rhythmic structures consistent with what's called intentional periodicity, a pattern that repeats with tiny self-correcting variations, a signature of intelligent encoding. In nature, patterns drift. In design, they recalibrate. That's exactly what these objects seem to do. Over time, their light fluctuations didn't decay, they adjusted. The difference between their first and last observed pulses was less than a fraction of a percent, almost like they were synchronizing to something invisible. Some suggested they were responding to solar input, adjusting reflectivity to maintain energy balance. Others wondered if they were responding to us. After all, Earth had pointed multiple high-power radar arrays at Oumuamua during its departure. If it was sensitive to electromagnetic energy, it might have detected us detecting it. What if the signal wasn't outbound, but reflexive? A reaction? The possibility was unnerving. Maybe Oumuamua wasn't talking. Maybe it was listening. Then, when Atlas left, something happened that no one could quite explain. As it drifted away into the dark, the very last flicker recorded by telescopes followed a sequence 3 pulses, evenly spaced, then silence. Some dismissed it as random data noise, but others saw something else. 3 pulses. 3 objects, one already gone, one departing, one still to come. In the months after, private groups began building small satellites dedicated to tracking interstellar intruders. Some were funded by research foundations, others were financed by billionaires who saw a once-in-history opportunity. The world had changed. People no longer looked at the night sky as empty. Every flicker of light, every streak across a telescope lens carried new weight. Humanity was waiting for the third signal. But here's the truth few admit out loud. If there was a message, we may not have been the ones it was meant for. Space is vast, and time is cruel. The distance between civilizations could span not just light years, but millennia. Maybe Oumuamua's signal wasn't directed toward Earth at all. Maybe it was a call across time, a message to descendants who would never receive it. Or maybe it was an automated probe repeating a forgotten broadcast, a machine speaking a language no one alive remembers. Even if we decoded it, would we understand what it meant? To us, it's a mystery wrapped in data. To whoever sent it, if anyone did, it could have been something simple. A warning, a greeting, a breadcrumb left in the cosmic dark, or perhaps something far stranger, a test to see which civilizations were capable of noticing. And if that's true, then maybe we've already passed. Because the universe doesn't send signals for no reason. It waits for someone to answer. And after Oumuamua and Atlas, humanity finally looked up and whispered back, not through radio waves, but through collective awe. Maybe that's what it wanted all along. Recognition, a sign that the silence of space wasn't infinite after all. But if these objects are truly messengers, then the most haunting question remains: who or what sent them? And more importantly, what happens when the sender decides it's time for a reply? Some people believe in coincidence, others believe in timing, and when you look closely at Oumuamua, it's hard to ignore how perfectly it appeared, almost as if the universe itself had been waiting for us to notice. The year was 2017. Our planet had just entered a new era of observation. For the first time in history, our telescopes were powerful enough, sensitive enough, and automated enough to scan the skies continuously, capturing every flicker of light above the horizon. Humanity had finally built eyes capable of seeing what had always been invisible. And then, as if on cue, Oumuamua arrived. Not 10 years earlier when we wouldn't have seen it. Not 10 years later when we might have dismissed it as just another comet. Exactly when we had the tools to recognize it for what it was, or at least to realize we didn't understand. That timing bothered people. It felt too convenient, too precise. Out of billions of years of cosmic history, this object had entered our solar system at the exact moment our technology reached the threshold to detect it. Think about that. The first interstellar object in recorded history, passing through our tiny neighborhood in a universe of infinite space, at the one moment in time when we could finally see it. To call that coincidence is to underestimate how fragile probability can be. If it had come a century earlier, no one would have known. If it had come a century later, maybe we wouldn't have cared. It chose a window so narrow, so improbably aligned with our progress, that even skeptics had to admit the odds were absurd. Astronomers calculated that objects like Oumuamua should enter our solar system roughly once every 100 million years. That's the estimated frequency of interstellar debris passing close enough to be noticed. But for us to not only witness it, but have instruments ready to analyze it in detail, the chances were even lower, like finding a single grain of sand in an ocean and realizing it landed right at your feet. Some scientists shrugged it off, others couldn't stop thinking about it. Timing, after all, is everything in communication, and maybe, just maybe, it was the message itself. Because what if the real signal wasn't in the data, but in the delivery? What if the universe or something within it had been waiting for us to evolve just far enough to perceive what was always there? It's a chilling thought that intelligence, whether natural or designed, operates on timescales we can barely comprehend. Maybe Oumuamua's path was calculated billions of years ago, its trajectory set in motion long before humanity even existed. Maybe it had been wandering through interstellar space, dormant and silent, until our sun's light triggered something, a sensor, a reflex, a wake-up call buried in its structure, like an ancient machine built to activate when it detected signs of life. It's not as impossible as it sounds. Our own civilization has done the same thing on smaller scales. We've sent satellites into orbit programmed to awaken decades later, waiting for specific triggers. We've built probes that sleep until they sense sunlight or gravity or radio contact. It's not far-fetched to imagine someone or something doing the same, just on a cosmic timeline. Maybe Oumuamua's arrival wasn't planned for us specifically, but for whoever developed the ability to see it. It could be a universal test. When your species is ready to notice, you will find this. The strange part is, we almost missed it. The object was detected on October 19, 2017, but it had entered our solar system weeks earlier, passing dangerously close to the Sun. For a while, no one even knew it was there. By the time telescopes spotted it, it was already on its way out. It was as if it wanted to be seen, but only briefly, just long enough to make us question what we saw. That fleetingness was part of its power. Like a ghost caught in a photograph, it appeared once and vanished, leaving behind data we still can't explain. Then, 8 years later, almost to the day, Atlas arrived. Different size, different shape, but the same uncanny timing, the same just within reach visibility, discovered exactly when humanity had advanced to the next level of detection. With machine learning now helping astronomers identify objects faster and more accurately than ever. If Oumuamua appeared when we first opened our cosmic eyes, Atlas came when we learned to truly focus. The symmetry was too perfect. One arrival marked our awakening, the other, our awareness. Some called it cosmic choreography, a pattern written across space and time, unfolding like a grand equation, each object arriving precisely when we were capable of noticing it, but not yet capable of understanding it. The pattern suggested intent, but not communication in the way we know it, more like an invitation, a breadcrumb trail leading us forward. If Oumuamua was the whisper, Atlas was the echo, and the timing between them might not have been coincidence at all. Consider this. Oumuamua left our system traveling at nearly 200,000 miles per hour. If it transmitted data during its pass, anything from electromagnetic radiation to encoded light, the information would take years to travel to its destination, depending on where that destination was. Now, assume that whoever or whatever received that data needed time to interpret it, respond, and send something back. 8 years later, another object appears, following a similar path, exhibiting similar behavior, at the exact technological moment when we could track it more closely than the first. The timeline fits almost perfectly. Coincidence starts to sound like the least likely explanation. That's what made researchers nervous. The precision was unnerving. Nature is random. It's messy, chaotic, and unpredictable. But this felt organized, like a sequence with an internal logic. It was as if someone or something had calibrated the cosmic clock, setting each event in motion long before we were capable of measuring it. And once we noticed, there was no unseeing it. The pattern was burned into our collective mind. When Loeb was asked about this alignment, he didn't call it proof. He called it suspicious. The kind of timing that makes you stop believing in chance. He compared it to walking down a deserted street and finding two identical coins from different eras lying side by side. The odds are microscopic, yet there they are, gleaming in the same patch of sunlight. You could call it luck, or you could admit that something put them there for a reason. Some scientists proposed a natural explanation rooted in statistics. They argued that our detection capabilities simply made these events seem rare when they weren't, that the sky had always been full of interstellar visitors, and we just hadn't looked hard enough before. But even that theory couldn't explain the symmetry, the near-exact interval, the mirrored behavior, the escalation in complexity. It was as though the universe was raising its voice, one octave at a time, and if the pattern holds, then logic suggests something else is coming. The next step in the sequence, the third event. If Oumuamua was the scout and Atlas the follow-up, what comes next may not just pass by. It might stay. The timing implies progression, awareness, confirmation, contact, each step, building on the last, synchronized not by chance but by design. Maybe not designed from a civilization we know, but from physics itself, an emergent intelligence woven into the fabric of space, using timing as its language. Because if you wanted to communicate across eons, across distances, so vast that light itself grows tired, you wouldn't use words or signals. You'd use patterns. You'd use timing, the one universal constant that transcends language, matter, and biology. Every creature, every atom, Every star understands rhythm. Even our hearts beat in sync with it. Perhaps that's why these arrivals feel so eerie. They're not speaking to our minds, but to something deeper, something instinctual. We recognize the rhythm even if we can't translate the message. So maybe the timing wasn't an accident. Maybe Oumuamua came when we were ready to notice. Atlas when we were ready to question. And the next whatever it is will come when we're ready to understand. If that's true, then the real countdown has already begun. Somewhere in the data, buried between trajectories and orbital calculations, lies the timestamp for the next encounter. Astronomers won't admit it publicly, but some have already started predicting it. They call it the interval theory. The window between arrivals, 8 years and some days, sets the clock. If it holds, the next object should appear around. That thought haunts the quiet corners of observatories. Every night, telescopes sweep the sky, and every night, scientists wonder if today's data will show something new, a faint streak of light from the edge of infinity, right on schedule. They won't call it confirmation, they'll call it coincidence again. But deep down, they'll know better. Because sometimes the universe doesn't speak in words or waves. Sometimes it speaks in moments. And maybe, just maybe, this is ours. By the time 3IATLAS entered the solar system, humanity was ready, or at least it thought it was. The world had changed since Oumuamua. Back in 2017, the idea of an interstellar visitor had shocked everyone. It was a story that dominated headlines for weeks, then quietly disappeared beneath the noise of politics and daily life. But the scientists never forgot. They kept watching, refining their instruments, building new systems designed to spot the next one. They called it the Vigilance Network, a global alliance of observatories that shared data in real time. Their goal simple: to make sure the next time something like Oumuamua appeared, we'd be prepared. But no one was prepared for Atlas. It started with a flicker, just a faint wandering light, picked up by an automated telescope array in Chile. At first it seemed like a routine detection, just another comet or asteroid passing through the outer regions of the solar system. But the data didn't fit. The velocity was wrong. The trajectory was hyperbolic again. And then came the realization that made everyone's stomach drop. It wasn't from here. The announcement hit the global scientific community like a shockwave. Second interstellar object detected. The words spread across screens, headlines, and live broadcasts within hours. Some called it 3IATLAS, others simply the return. Within days, telescopes around the world turned toward the object, and what they saw defied every expectation. It was huge, nearly 10 kilometers across, far larger than Oumuamua. It glowed faintly even without sunlight, a steady, eerie luminescence that seemed to pulse from within. For a while, scientists debated whether the light was an artifact of observation, perhaps reflection or dust interference. But when multiple instruments across continents confirmed it, denial became impossible. Atlas was glowing on its own. That was the moment when curiosity became fear. Natural objects don't glow without reason. There are comets that shine due to outgassing, sure, but Atlas emitted light at wavelength that made no sense. It wasn't thermal, it wasn't radioactive, it was spectral, controlled, like a machine running on an unknown principle. The frequencies shifted as it moved, almost like modulation, and the closer it got, the more the rhythm resembled something structured. Some said it was coincidence, the artifact of distance and dust. Others whispered the same question that had haunted humanity since Oumuamua: what if it wasn't coincidence at all? Within weeks, Atlas became the most studied object in human history. Every space agency, from NASA to the European Space Agency to China's CNSA, pointed its instruments toward it. Private observatories joined in. Amateurs with powerful telescopes streamed live images to online networks, creating a collective eye on the sky. For the first time, the world watched together, not out of superstition, but out of genuine uncertainty. No one could predict what Atlas was going to do. Then came the first anomaly. As it approached the inner solar system, Atlas began to slow down, not dramatically, but measurably. A natural body should have accelerated as it fell toward the sun's gravity well. Atlas did the opposite. The deceleration wasn't random either. It followed a smooth, deliberate curve, as if something were guiding it. Within scientific circles, panic simmered beneath professionalism. Gravitational irregularity, some called it, grasping for a natural explanation. But deep down they knew nature doesn't make objects break. That was when Avi Loeb resurfaced in the media, this time less as a fringe voice, and more as a prophet. He had warned years ago that Oumuamua might have been a probe, and now, with Atlas acting like one, people started listening. "We're witnessing something ancient," he said on an interview broadcast to millions. "Either it's technology, or it's a phenomenon we're not ready to understand, but it's not random." His words spread like wildfire. The next few weeks blurred the line between science and hysteria. Governments issued statements assuring the public there was nothing to fear, that Atlas posed no threat to Earth. But the tone of those briefings felt rehearsed, too calm to be honest. In the background, private leaks revealed that several agencies were coordinating emergency observation programs. The leaked documents used one term repeatedly: close approach window. That phrase alone was enough to ignite conspiracy theories worldwide. When Atlas finally came close enough for direct imaging, what appeared shocked even the most skeptical scientists. Its shape was unlike anything expected. It wasn't spherical like a planet, nor irregular like a comet. It was elongated, almost symmetrical, with ridges that ran parallel across its surface, ridges too straight to be natural erosion. The reflectivity of those surfaces matched metal, though no known alloy could have survived such exposure to radiation. For days, the internet was flooded with enhanced images, showing what some claimed were patterns, symbols, or markings. NASA dismissed them as pareidolia, the human brain seeing order where there was none. But even the official footage felt uncanny. Atlas didn't look like a rock, it looked like something built. Then, just before it reached perihelion, the closest point to the sun, Atlas began to vibrate. It wasn't visible to the naked eye, but telescopic light curves picked it up clearly, faint, rhythmic oscillations that repeated every 11 hours. To the human ear, it would have sounded like a hum. To instruments, it looked like modulation, a carrier wave of unknown origin. For a few hours, it was as if the object was alive, responding to solar radiation not as a passive body, but as a system reacting to input. And then, as abruptly as it began, the oscillation stopped. What came next was stranger. Instead of continuing its path and fading into space like Oumuamua, Atlas lingered. It stayed within range longer than any prediction had suggested. The deceleration continued until it seemed to stabilize, not orbiting, not drifting, just hovering in its trajectory like something holding position. Every gravitational model said it was impossible, yet the data was clear. For nearly 48 hours, Atlas resisted the sun's pull, its motion perfectly balanced between forces that should have torn it apart. Some called it a solar sail maneuver. Others said it was an illusion caused by measurement error. But those who watched the numbers knew better. Nature doesn't hold its breath. The silence around official data releases grew louder. Governments stopped publishing real-time telemetry, claiming data verification. Amateur astronomers were ordered to refrain from sharing raw tracking information. That only made people more desperate to know what was happening. Live streams of skywatchers were suddenly cut mid-broadcast. Social media exploded with speculation. Some believed Atlas was about to change course, others that it already had. And then, as if the universe itself was tired of watching us panic, Atlas began to move again. Slowly at first, then faster, accelerating once more toward the outer system. But something was different. The trajectory had shifted ever so slightly, just enough to cross the same general outbound region that Oumuamua had traveled 8 years earlier. To anyone else, that would have been meaningless, but to those who had followed the pattern, it was a message written in motion. 2 paths, 1 destination. That night, Loeb said something that stuck with everyone who heard it. "If this were a probe," he said quietly, "it's not sending us a message, it's sending one to whoever sent the first." The implication was staggering. Maybe Oumuamua had sent out data when it passed the sun, data that took years to travel across space. And now, Atlas was delivering its response. Not to us, but through us. We were just bystanders, watching an exchange between civilizations that might have begun long before humanity was born. After it left, the brightness faded. The instruments picked up one last flare, a single flash brighter than anything before, and then nothing. It was gone. For weeks, scientists argued over what had caused the flash. Some said it was thermal disintegration. Others said it was a reflection. But in the silence that followed, no one could shake the feeling that it had been intentional, a sign-off, A closing remark. Atlas had come and gone, but it left behind a new kind of silence. Not the quiet of absence, but the silence of anticipation. People stopped asking whether we were alone. They started wondering what would come next. Oumuamua had opened the question. Atlas had deepened it. And now, for the first time in history, humanity was waiting not for proof, but for the next act. And in observatories across the world, telescopes kept their watch, their lenses trained on the empty black where Atlas had disappeared. Because deep down, no one believed it was over. The timing, the pattern, the impossible physics, they all pointed to one chilling truth. Something was coming, and when it did, the world would no longer be a spectator. When Atlas finally drifted away, it didn't leave silence behind. It left dust, an immense glittering cloud that shimmered faintly in the wake of its departure. At first, scientists thought it was normal. Comets shed dust all the time when they passed near the sun, their icy cores vaporizing, leaving trails of gas and debris that stretch for millions of kilometers. It's one of the most predictable events in astronomy, but the dust Atlas left behind wasn't like anything we'd seen before. It didn't behave like comet dust. It didn't follow the natural dispersion pattern that gravity and solar radiation should have created. It stayed together, tightly bound, structured, organized as if held in place by invisible threads. Telescopes captured images that defied explanation. Instead of a chaotic cloud expanding in every direction, the dust formed concentric layers, rings that pulsed faintly, like ripples frozen in space. Each ring had uniform spacing, almost as if measured, and within those rings, tiny clusters glowed faintly, reflecting light in perfect synchronization. Astronomers tried to dismiss it as a trick of perspective, some optical illusion caused by distance or lens interference, but when multiple observatories across the world confirmed the exact same structure, the illusion theory died quickly. Something about that dust was unnatural. The first reports called it persistent particulate cohesion. In simpler terms, it meant the dust was holding itself together. Space doesn't allow for that. Once a comet releases particles, solar radiation and gravity scatter them in all directions. They drift, disperse and fade, but Atlas's dust didn't drift. It hovered, locked in a delicate balance, each particle mirroring the motion of the others. Some scientists speculated it was due to electromagnetic interaction, maybe charged particles, aligning under the influence of the sun's magnetic field. That could explain part of it, but not the geometry. Nature creates patterns, yes, but not ones so precise, so eerily mathematical. And then came the strangest finding of all. There was dust, but no gas. None. Comets release gas when heat vaporizes ice. It's the gas that drags dust into space, forming the bright tails we see. Without gas, there's no release mechanism, no reason for dust to exist in the first place. It's like finding smoke without fire. Instruments designed to detect molecular signatures searched for any sign of vapor, water, carbon monoxide, methane, but the readings were flat. The dust was alone, suspended, glowing faintly without a single molecule of gas to explain its origin. That made no sense. Every rule said it should have been impossible. The data confused even the most skeptical researchers. There must be gas, they insisted. We're just not detecting it. But as more observatories joined in, the evidence became undeniable. Whatever had caused the dust emission wasn't chemical or thermal. It was something else. The question that haunted everyone was simple. What kind of process can create matter without heat, light, or combustion? A few daring voices proposed the unthinkable. Maybe it wasn't a natural process at all. Maybe it was controlled. If Atlas had been artificial, perhaps the dust wasn't waste. It was information, a kind of broadcast, encoded in particles rather than radio waves. Each grain could be a fragment of data, released deliberately into space, scattering like digital breadcrumbs across the solar system. After all, humans had already theorized about using dust-sized nanoprobes to transmit information through light modulation. The technology was still theoretical here on Earth, but maybe somewhere else, it was ancient history. The patterns supported that theory in ways that were hard to ignore. When astrophysicists plotted the distribution of the dust rings, they found ratios that matched prime number sequences, not perfectly, but close enough to be more than coincidence. In mathematics, primes are universal. They transcend language, culture, and biology. They're the simplest form of communication that any intelligent mind would understand. If someone wanted to send a message that said, "We are here," that's how they'd do it. And now, suspended in the darkness beyond Mars, was a structure built out of dust itself, whispering mathematics into the void. Not everyone was convinced. The debate split the scientific community in two. One side argued that it was just coincidence, the human mind imposing order on randomness. They said the dust patterns could be explained by electrostatic clumping, by interactions with the solar wind, by 1,000 small, unmeasurable forces acting together. The other side pointed to the precision, the repetition, the deliberate symmetry that kept appearing no matter how they analyzed it. The dust wasn't chaotic, it was repeating itself, and repetition in nature usually means design. The longer they observed it, the stranger it became. The dust cloud didn't disperse with time, it evolved. Over days and weeks, it shifted shape, its rings contracting and expanding as though following a cycle. The intervals matched Atlas's original rotation period, 11 hours. The same timing, now imprinted into the debris it left behind. It was as if the object had imprinted its rhythm onto the dust itself, turning the residue of its passage into a living echo. Satellite sensors detected faint electromagnetic fluctuations near the cloud. Nothing strong, but enough to suggest movement, microscopic pulses of charge passing between particles. The readings were erratic but rhythmic, following the same 11-hour beat. When someone overlaid the signal onto the light curves from Oumuamua 8 years earlier, the synchronization was almost perfect. It was the same rhythm stretched across time and space, repeating itself like a signature. Two objects, two eras, one frequency. The universe was humming the same song. When this discovery hit the public, the reaction was immediate. Some called it proof of extraterrestrial technology. Others said it was mass hysteria dressed in science. But the timing, the math, the precision, it all felt too deliberate to ignore. For weeks, every major news outlet ran segments about the Atlas pattern, documentaries, interviews, late-night debates. It became an obsession. People pointed telescopes at the sky, hoping to glimpse the fading trail. Some even claimed the dust rings pulsed brighter when observed under specific wavelengths, as though responding to being watched. Whether that was real or not didn't matter. The mystery had already taken on a life of its own. Then something even stranger happened. As the dust cloud drifted further from the sun, it should have dimmed, its reflective brightness decreasing as the particles cooled. Instead, it grew brighter, slowly at first, then rapidly, until the faint glow became visible, even to mid-range observatories. Spectral analysis revealed no energy source, no heat, no chemical reaction, no ionization. The dust was simply reflecting light that wasn't there. It was as if the particles were amplifying background radiation, turning invisible energy into visible illumination. One scientist compared it to fiber optics, each grain channeling light along invisible threads. But that would require structure, an internal framework guiding the reflection. How could dust have structure? A few theorized that the particles weren't ordinary dust at all. Maybe they were metallic, nanoscopic, capable of self-organization, tiny machines, remnants of a system designed to self-assemble when exposed to certain conditions. The idea bordered on science fiction, but the evidence was relentless. The dust cloud wasn't fading, it was adapting, and the timing couldn't have been worse. Because just as the cloud reached peak luminosity, Earth satellites began picking up faint interference patterns across multiple communication bands. Nothing disruptive, just tiny fluctuations, oscillations that matched the same 11-hour cycle. Every device, every network, every satellite affected at once. The pattern repeated for 3 days, then stopped, leaving no trace. It was as if the dust had spoken once, just long enough for us to know it could. Governments denied the connection. They blamed solar activity, magnetospheric noise, anything they could. But scientists knew solar interference doesn't mimic precision. It doesn't follow prime sequences, and it doesn't stop exactly when the dust dims. Whatever had happened was real, and it had been brief but deliberate. The message, if that's what it was, had been sent. When the dust finally began to dissipate, astronomers realized it wasn't gone. It was simply invisible to our eyes. Instruments tracking deep infrared signatures found that the particles were moving together, forming a thin, faintly glowing stream stretching outward from the solar system. Not a random dispersal. A path, a corridor of particles pointing toward a single direction in the sky, the same direction Oumuamua had come from 8 years before. It was no longer just a coincidence. It was a pattern. Oumuamua, Atlas, and now the dust, all aligned along one invisible thread running through the stars. And whatever lay at the end of that line, it was waiting. Humanity had always searched the cosmos for messages, for proof that it wasn't alone. But what if the proof had been drifting through our solar system all along, not as a signal to us, but as a breadcrumb trail for someone else? If Atlas's dust was indeed a transmission, then maybe we weren't the audience. Maybe we were the bystanders of a conversation older than our species, watching the afterimage of an exchange between civilizations that mastered time itself. And as the last of the dust disappeared beyond the reach of our telescopes, one question lingered in the silence. If this was the message, when would the answer arrive? The dust was gone, but its echo remained, not in the sky but in the minds of everyone who had seen it. Across the world, scientists who had once prided themselves on certainty found themselves staring into the void of not knowing. For centuries, science had been the language of order, the art of explaining the unexplainable. But Atlas had broken that language. It didn't fit the models. It didn't follow the rules. And worst of all, it didn't care. It simply existed, proof that something beyond our understanding had passed through our solar system, leaving behind a riddle written in light and silence. At first, there was chaos. Every major observatory on Earth released their raw data simultaneously, in a desperate attempt to regain control of the narrative. Thousands of graphs, simulations, and infrared maps flooded the internet. Some tried to prove that the dust structure was a natural phenomenon, a side effect of electromagnetic resonance or solar radiation pressure. Others went the opposite way, suggesting the particles were artificial, remnants of a machine built from materials we couldn't replicate. Within hours, the scientific community had split into two factions, the skeptics and the signalists. The skeptics argued that humans were pattern-seeking creatures. They said we had been primed to find meaning where there was none, the same way we see faces in clouds or constellations in random stars. The data was just noise, they insisted, a coincidence amplified by our collective obsession with alien life. The signalists disagreed. To them, the pattern wasn't illusion, it was intention. They pointed to the prime number spacing, the sustained geometry, the electromagnetic fluctuations that followed the same 11-hour cycle as Atlas itself. That level of precision didn't happen by accident. At first, the debate stayed academic. Polite papers, peer-reviewed rebuttals, cautious interviews on late-night science programs. But when the evidence refused to fade, the tone shifted. People stopped debating whether it was artificial. They started arguing over what kind of artificial. Some believed Atlas was a probe, a relic from a civilization older than ours, programmed to seed messages across the stars. Others proposed something darker, that it was a weapon, a surveillance device, or even the remnant of a machine war long forgotten by its creators. The tension spilled out of academia and into politics. Governments around the world began to quietly fund deep pattern research projects, most of them classified. Space agencies that once competed now worked in wary cooperation, trading data under the table. The public didn't know it, but something fundamental had shifted. The world's brightest minds were no longer asking whether we were alone. They were asking how long we had been observed. Leaked documents from within NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory hinted at something chilling. One internal memo, dated only a week after Atlas's departure, read, "If these signals are intentional, we are no longer the observers. We are the observers." That line made its way into the press, igniting global panic. For the first time, science had crossed a line into theology, not because it invoked gods, but because it forced humanity to confront its smallness. In universities, young scientists began abandoning conventional research to study Atlas full-time. Entire departments restructured around what some called exoengineering. The question wasn't just what is it, but how could it work? Theories emerged that stretched imagination itself: self-replicating dust matrices, quantum-locked microstructures, biological nanotech fused with metallic lattices. It wasn't just one mystery anymore, it was 1,000. Even among the skeptics, confidence began to erode. A paper published by a team from the European Southern Observatory tried to disprove the electromagnetic readings associated with the dust cloud, but when they recalculated using new data, they found a faint residual signal, one that pulsed every 11 hours, 42 minutes, precisely the period of Atlas's last recorded light cycle. That single discovery cracked their own argument in half. The lead author resigned 2 days later. The phenomenon began to infect more than just astronomy. Linguists, mathematicians, and computer scientists all joined the fray, trying to decode the geometry embedded in the dust's pattern. If the cloud was a message, what did it say? Some argued that it was too complex to be communication, more likely a form of self-replication. Others believed it was both, a machine that spoke through its own behavior, using mathematics as language and light as voice. Religious leaders couldn't stay silent either. Some called Atlas a divine sign, proof of intelligent design on a cosmic scale. Others condemned it as a deception, a test of faith. But no sermon could compete with the raw power of the images themselves, the dust rings, the glowing particles, the perfect symmetry. People stared at those pictures the way ancient civilizations once stared at eclipses, half in awe, half in fear. In the months that followed, the world's most powerful organizations tried to control the narrative. Governments issued joint statements insisting there was no credible evidence that Atlas was artificial, but the tone was defensive, hollow. The truth was, no one could explain it, and the more they denied, the more the public believed the opposite. Independent researchers began launching private satellites to study the path where Atlas had traveled. The data they returned was disturbing. Even after the dust faded beyond visual detection, faint radio echoes persisted along its route. They weren't strong enough to classify as transmissions, but they weren't background noise either. The frequencies fluctuated in a predictable way, rising and falling over a repeating 88-day cycle. No known natural process could explain that pattern. It was as if something invisible was still there, vibrating in silence. Meanwhile, the Breakthrough Listen initiative, the same program that had scanned Oumuamua years earlier, picked up a faint burst of narrow-band radio noise from the same direction the dust was heading. It lasted less than 2 seconds. When decoded, the signal revealed a repeating pulse structure based on prime intervals 2, 3, 5, 7, 11, before cutting off. For the scientists listening that night, it was like hearing an echo across time. Oumuamua, Atlas, and now this. 3 notes of the same cosmic melody. The discovery should have united the scientific community. Instead, it tore it apart. The skeptics accused the signalists of data manipulation, claiming the prime pattern was a coincidence caused by statistical compression. The signalists fired back, accusing the skeptics of denial driven by fear. For the first time in history, science had encountered something it couldn't agree on, not because of lack of data, but because of what the data implied. In an emergency meeting behind closed doors, representatives from NASA, ESA, Roscosmos, and CNSA gathered to decide how to handle the growing crisis. The transcript of that meeting was later leaked. One line stood out. "If this is communication, we are in the middle of a conversation we don't understand, and that makes us vulnerable." The fear wasn't of aliens. It was of uncertainty. Humans could handle threats. They could even handle enemies. But they couldn't handle the unknown, not one that looked back at them from the stars. Within a year, multiple space agencies began drafting plans for a mission to intercept the next interstellar object. If one appeared, they called the initiative Sentinel. Its purpose was simple: to meet the next visitor head-on, to see it up close before it left again. But the deeper purpose was far more desperate: to prove once and for all that the universe still obeyed rules we could understand. But as the planning began, another realization set in. The data from the Atlas cloud, the radio echoes, even the faint electromagnetic pulses, all of them pointed in one direction. The same line through space both Oumuamua and Atlas had followed, and if that trajectory held, the next object would not come from interstellar space. It would come from within the same corridor, as if retracing a path deliberately. When that prediction leaked, everything changed. The question was no longer whether something had been here. It was when it would return. And somewhere in the quiet hum of observatories across the world, as computers scanned the heavens and algorithms sifted through the endless noise, one silent truth began to take shape. A truth no scientist wanted to say out loud, but none could deny anymore. The visitors hadn't come by accident. They had come on schedule. By the time the word Sentinel leaked, it was already too late to hide what was coming. The data was public. Anyone with a telescope could see the same trajectory. The line that had once carried Oumuamua and Atlas was empty now. but not silent. Instruments still picked up faint radio fluctuations, steady, pulsing, rhythmic, as if something distant was whispering in intervals too slow for human patience. Scientists couldn't prove it meant anything, but the timing was undeniable. The same corridor, the same pattern, the same direction, and the numbers pointed toward one truth. Whatever had passed before wasn't finished. Something else was on its way. Governments around the world pretended to stay calm. They issued statements filled with the same polished language. No credible threat, ongoing investigation, natural celestial phenomenon. But behind closed doors, fear was beginning to spread faster than information could contain it. The panic didn't start in the streets. It started in the offices of people who knew too much. The astrophysicists, defense analysts, and agency directors who understood probability. They were the first to realize the terrifying pattern forming in the data. The intervals were closing. Whatever these objects were, they weren't random visitors. They were scheduled arrivals. The United Nations tried to establish an emergency committee, an interstellar response council. The idea was to bring scientists and military leaders together to develop a unified plan. But cooperation died before it began. Every nation wanted control of the information. The United States claimed it had priority through NASA and its defense contracts. China built its own monitoring network in silence. Russia revived old Cold War facilities in Siberia to track deep space anomalies. Even private space companies got involved, quietly building detection satellites under contracts so classified their engineers didn't know what they were launching. But the secrecy didn't stay secret for long. Leaked images began appearing online. Low-resolution photos from military satellites showing faint glowing structures moving through deep space. Most were hoaxes, but a few were real enough to ignite conspiracy theories that caught fire overnight. Atlas wasn't leaving, one post claimed. It was marking. Others insisted the dust had been a kind of map, a cosmic breadcrumb left for the next object to follow. The theories grew faster than facts could keep up, and governments made the worst possible decision. They stopped talking altogether. Within months, official channels went silent, press briefings vanished, space agency websites went offline for maintenance. Live feeds from major observatories were suddenly restricted to internal networks. When reporters demanded answers, they were met with evasions and denials. It was the kind of silence that didn't protect anyone. It only made the world afraid. That fear became global currency. Every headline turned into speculation. Was the next object bigger, closer, dangerous? Would it enter orbit? Would it crash? People searched for answers in everything: the Bible, old alien theories, even the Mayan calendar. Panic seeped into the collective consciousness like static. It wasn't just fear of the unknown. It was the realization that maybe the governments weren't hiding the truth because they wanted power. Maybe they were hiding it because they didn't understand it either. Inside the Pentagon, the word protocol took on a new meaning. Documents surfaced later, showing that defense officials had quietly issued a series of contingencies under the codename Black Horizon. It wasn't a weapon plan, it was a containment plan, how to control information when the next object arrived. Every step was outlined: intercept media coverage, restrict telescope access, manage civilian communication networks. They weren't preparing to fight something, they were preparing to manage perception, because the one thing more dangerous than an alien arrival, they decided, was mass hysteria. But control slipped faster than they expected. Amateur astronomers noticed irregular interference in radio bands long before the public did. One independent observer in Argentina released data showing subtle oscillations in the same 11-hour cycle associated with ATLAS. The signal was faint, almost ghost-like, but it was there. Within days, copies of his data spread across forums and social media, sparking a new wave of speculation. "They're coming back," people whispered online. "The next one's already on the way." Governments responded with silence again, but silence was its own answer. Then came the blackout. It started small, an outage in global satellite communication networks, dismissed as a solar storm, but it spread, affecting GPS, deep space telemetry, and major research servers across Europe and North America. For 43 hours, humanity's eyes went blind. When systems came back online, much of the archived data about Atlas's trajectory was missing. Files erased, logs rewritten, timestamps mismatched. A few scientists had backups, but their institutions were told not to publish. The reasoning was always the same: to prevent misinformation. In that vacuum, truth became folklore. People didn't need proof anymore. They had belief. Online forums turned into digital temples of speculation. Some claimed governments had made contact and were negotiating. Others believed the visitors were already here, hiding in orbit or beneath the oceans. The lack of evidence only fed the hysteria. For the first time in history, science had become a faith. And faith, once awakened, doesn't go back to sleep. While the world argued, something stranger began happening. Across multiple continents, radio telescopes started picking up rhythmic static bursts, short and irregular but eerily synchronized between stations thousands of miles apart. Each burst lasted less than a second. At first it was dismissed as interference. Then, when analysts compared the timestamps, they realized the bursts were coordinated. They followed a cycle 11 hours, 42 minutes, matching the same pulse recorded from Atlas years earlier. The signals weren't coming from space. They were being reflected through space, bouncing between Earth's ionosphere and something beyond the planet's magnetosphere. Something big enough to echo back. Governments stayed silent, but private companies didn't. One leaked internal report from a satellite provider suggested the reflections were originating from a point approximately 0.3 astronomical units beyond Mars. That distance placed it directly along the Atlas Oumuamua trajectory. Whatever was there wasn't visible, but it was responding, slowly, repetitively, like something waiting for a reply. By then, the world was on edge. Stock markets fell, religions fractured, entire social movements rose around the idea that the visitors were returning to judge humanity, or to save it. Cults formed, promising salvation for those who listened to the frequency. Governments cracked down, banning public broadcasts that referenced interstellar arrivals. The more they suppressed it, the more people believed. Humanity had entered an age of cosmic paranoia. Inside classified briefings, the truth was even stranger. The Global Sentinel Initiative had detected faint gravitational distortions near the outer edge of the solar system. Subtle but growing, not strong enough to indicate a massive object, but consistent with something accelerating toward the inner system. The pattern matched the expected arrival corridor exactly. Officials debated what to do. Some wanted to alert the public immediately. Others argued that the data was inconclusive, but behind the politics, one truth united them all. They were terrified, because if it was another object, its size and trajectory meant it wasn't just passing by this time, it was slowing down. That single phrase, "it's slowing down," was enough to shift global priorities overnight. The Sentinel network went dark, its live feeds encrypted and restricted to military servers. The United Nations dissolved the Interstellar Response Council. Publicly, space agencies continued to claim normal operations. Privately, they stopped sleep entirely. A quiet war began, not against the unknown, but against exposure. Every government feared the same thing, losing control of the narrative. Meanwhile, the skies remained quiet. No bright streaks, no glowing dust, no confirmation. But every night, deep in the quiet of observatories, instruments recorded the same faint hum, the same pulse that had started this story years before. 11 hours, 42 minutes, it had never stopped. By the end of that year, something broke in humanity's collective mind. People didn't talk about politics or war anymore. They talked about the countdown. Whether they admitted it or not, everyone knew it was happening. You could see it in the headlines, the markets, the way crowds stared longer at the night sky. Humanity wasn't looking out anymore. It was looking up, waiting, listening, dreading. And in that silence, a single idea began to spread. A whisper among scientists, soldiers, and citizens alike. Maybe the governments hadn't gone quiet because they were afraid of panic. Maybe they had gone quiet because they had already received an answer. They never called it the countdown publicly, but everyone knew that's what it was. Scientists whispered it in private messages. Journalists hinted at it in cryptic posts before deleting them, and amateur astronomers posted their last observations online with titles like Day -30. No one needed confirmation anymore. The data spoke for itself. The faint gravitational distortions first detected by Sentinel had begun to sharpen, subtle at first, then undeniable. Something massive was approaching through the same cosmic corridor traced by Oumuamua and Atlas, following the same trajectory with terrifying precision. But unlike the others, this one wasn't just passing through. It was decelerating. The numbers made no sense. To slow down in interstellar space required energy, tremendous, deliberate energy. No natural body could do that. No asteroid, no comet, no drifting fragment of cosmic debris had ever behaved that way. It was as if the laws of motion had bent in obedience to something unseen. Some scientists refused to accept it, rewriting models again and again to explain what was happening. But the data didn't care about theories. Every night the readings came back clearer. Whatever was coming wasn't an accident. It was arriving. The first official leak came from inside the European Space Agency. An internal memo, never meant for public eyes, summarized the situation in one sentence that spread like wildfire. The incoming body appears to be applying controlled deceleration. That phrase ignited panic. Within hours, social media erupted into chaos. Hashtags like #denyingJane, the third, and over here trended across every platform. Conspiracy channels that had been mocked years earlier suddenly became prophets, replaying old footage of Oumuamua and Atlas with captions like "We were warned." Governments scrambled to contain the hysteria, but it was too late. The silence they had built to maintain control now turned against them. Every denial sounded like confirmation, every statement like a cover-up. People demanded to see the raw data. Scientists who had once been symbols of reason were now accused of being part of the lie. Observatories received threats from groups demanding they tell the truth about what's coming. Even within the agencies, cracks formed. Some researchers began leaking images to journalists, convinced humanity had the right to know. One image in particular broke the illusion of calm. It came from a deep space telescope orbiting near the moon, grainy, blurred but unmistakable. Against the black backdrop of space was a faint glimmer, not round like a planet, but elongated, symmetrical. It wasn't glowing from reflection, it was glowing from within. Analysts estimated it was roughly 50 kilometers long, larger than both Oumuamua and Atlas combined. It wasn't tumbling chaotically, it was steady, controlled, purposeful. The leak spread across the internet faster than anyone could suppress it. Governments issued denials, calling it doctored, but independent verification followed within days. Observatories in Japan, Chile, and South Africa confirmed the same readings, an object moving at 87,000 kilometers per hour, decelerating with mechanical precision as it approached the outer planets. The deceleration pattern matched the energy curve of a controlled descent. It wasn't falling toward the sun, it was aligning with something. That was when the timing became impossible to ignore. The object's projected arrival near Earth orbit matched exactly 8 years to the month since Atlas's departure, the same interval that separated Oumuamua from Atlas, the same mathematical spacing that had haunted scientists for over a decade. 3 objects, 3 arrivals, 3 warnings. The world reacted in stages. At first came disbelief, then panic, then acceptance. People stopped pretending it wasn't happening. The countdown wasn't a number, it was a feeling. You could sense it in the air, in the way crowds grew silent when looking at the night sky. Even cities seemed quieter, streetlights felt dimmer, the noise of civilization had softened as though the planet itself was holding its breath. Religions reawakened in strange forms. Some saw the arrival as divine retribution, others as deliverance. New cults formed, blending science with prophecy, claiming the visitors were architects of humanity, returning to reclaim their creation. Governments tried to keep order, but their words had lost weight. You can't manage panic when the stars themselves are moving. Then came the signals. They didn't start as radio waves or light pulses, but as something stranger synchronized electromagnetic fluctuations across the planet's atmosphere. It began in Antarctica, where research stations recorded rhythmic distortions in the ionosphere, pulsing every 11 hours and 42 minutes. The same interval tied to Atlas. Within days, similar readings appeared across other continents, perfectly in sync. The planet was vibrating to a hidden rhythm, as if echoing the heartbeat of something vast approaching through the dark. For a while, scientists tried to rationalize it as a solar phenomenon, but the sun's activity was low, unusually quiet. The rhythm didn't match solar wind patterns or cosmic background radiation. It matched them. The same pattern from the dust that had once pulsed around Atlas before vanishing into the stars. The same frequency that had haunted radio telescopes for years. The global networks monitoring electromagnetic activity went silent soon after. Their feeds were encrypted, their data hidden behind military firewalls. But by then, people already knew. Strange interference began to affect communications, flickers in video signals, whispers of static in radio broadcasts that seemed to form patterns, even shapes. When slowed down and visualized, the noise resembled concentric rings, the same structure seen in Atlas's dust. The planet itself had become a mirror for the message. As the weeks passed, fear turned into obsession. Cities filled with watchers, people who spent nights staring at the sky, waiting for the moment it appeared. Some gathered in open fields, holding up lights and mirrors, as though signaling back. Others sealed themselves inside, convinced the end was near. Economies collapsed under the weight of uncertainty. The stock market didn't crash. It simply stopped, frozen by collective paralysis. What good was money when the universe had turned its gaze toward you? Then the governments vanished from view. Press briefings stopped. News anchors were replaced by pre-recorded statements. Even social media algorithms began filtering out posts containing keywords like object, arrival, and third. But people found other ways to speak. They posted coordinates, timestamps, short cryptic messages. The sky hums. It's closer. Listen at midnight. It was no longer about science. It had become myth. Meanwhile, behind closed doors, world leaders met in secret. The Sentinel project had confirmed the impossible. The object wasn't just slowing, it was changing direction. It was steering. Each course correction brought it closer to a fixed point between Earth and the Moon, the very region of space known as the Lagrange point, an area of perfect gravitational balance, a place where an object could remain indefinitely. It wasn't coming to crash, it was coming to stay. That realization shattered every illusion of control. Militaries debated defense protocols, but against what? You can't shoot at gravity. You can't threaten something that's older than your species. Some argued to reach out to send a signal, a greeting, a plea. Others warned that communication could invite catastrophe. The debate went nowhere, and time was running out. The countdown was no longer hypothetical. It had a date. When the final predictions were published by rogue scientists online, they all pointed to the same moment, December 17th. That was the day the object would enter the Earth-Moon system, the day the countdown would end. As that date approached, strange things began to happen on Earth. Magnetic fields fluctuated unpredictably. Birds migrated in the wrong directions. Compasses spun aimlessly. At night, the auroras brightened beyond anything in recorded history. Vivid waves of color washing across the sky as though the atmosphere itself were reacting. People started hearing low-frequency hums that seemed to come from the ground. Entire cities reported faint vibrations that followed the same 11-hour cycle. Scientists claimed it was psychological, but psychology doesn't shake the Earth. Then, 3 days before the predicted arrival, the world went dark. Satellites failed, global communication networks collapsed, the internet fragmented into isolated nodes. For the first time in the digital age, the planet was blind. The only information came from whispers, from radio operators sending shortwave transmissions across the static, describing what they saw, a faint light appearing beyond the moon, growing brighter with each hour. On the final night, millions of people gathered under the open sky. No one spoke, no one prayed, they simply watched. And when the light appeared, silent, steady, immense, the world exhaled as one. It wasn't a flash or a comet, it wasn't fire or chaos, it was presence, a line of light stretching across the heavens, pulsing with rhythm, slow and deliberate, like a heartbeat older than time itself. And as it hovered there in the space between Earth and the Moon, the world realized something terrifyingly beautiful. This wasn't the beginning of contact. It was the end of waiting. No one knew what to call it at first. The light wasn't just visible, it was alive. Hanging motionless between Earth and the Moon, it shimmered like a wound in the sky, widening and contracting as though it were breathing. There was no explosion, no thunder, no chaos, just silence, and that silence was worse than any noise. It wasn't the absence of sound, it was the feeling that everything had stopped listening. Astronomers tried to study it, but their instruments failed one by one. Cameras burned out, sensors overloaded. Even the most advanced telescopes returned static. It wasn't just interference, It was as if the light itself refused to be measured. When the first images finally came through, captured through improvised analog lenses, they showed something so vast, so intricate, that words failed. The object was not solid, not in the way we understand solidity. It looked like a lattice, a geometric cathedral suspended in space, translucent and shimmering, built from overlapping structures that seemed to fold into themselves. It pulsed with the same rhythm, the same 11-hour cycle that had haunted humanity for 16 years. And each pulse wasn't just light, it carried resonance. Every time it flared, the Earth's magnetic field trembled. Compasses twitched, radios crackled with bursts of noise that when slowed down sounded almost like voices. Not words, not language, just tones, harmonics, as if something enormous was trying to tune the planet. At first, governments tried to regain control of the narrative. They called it an anomaly, a spatial distortion, a solar reflection event. But no one believed them. How could they? You could look up and see it with your own eyes. A living halo suspended above the world, glowing faintly even during the day. People described it as everything from divine to mechanical. Churches filled overnight. So did bunkers. Humanity was unified not by faith, but by fear. The first spacecraft sent to approach it, a small unmanned probe, never made it. Launched from lunar orbit, it accelerated smoothly toward the structure, its instruments transmitting perfectly until the final minute. Then the feed cut to static. When the signal returned, the probe was gone, not destroyed, gone. No debris, no impact. It simply ceased to desist. The only thing left was a faint echo in its telemetry, 3 pulses, spaced evenly apart before total silence. Scientists around the world stared at that data in disbelief. 3 pulses, the same pattern that marked the ends of both Oumuamua and Atlas's journeys. The same signature, repeating again, now right above the planet. It was no longer coincidence. It was ritual. The object didn't move, but the Earth did. As days passed, strange phenomena began to ripple across the planet. Tides shifted unpredictably. The atmosphere thickened slightly, as though energy were being drawn downward. Lights appeared in the upper atmosphere, filaments of luminescence connecting faintly to the structure above. They resembled auroras, but behaved differently, organized, pulsing in synchronized waves that matched the object's rhythm. It was as though the planet itself was being scanned. At first, scientists believed it might be energy collection, some vast process harnessing solar radiation through Earth's magnetosphere. But then they noticed something impossible. The object wasn't absorbing energy. It was sending. Instruments recorded faint streams of radiation directed downward, invisible to the naked eye but measurable through thermal distortion. The streams struck specific regions, oceans, deserts, mountain ranges, and in each case the local magnetic field shifted slightly afterward. It was mapping the planet. No, not mapping, measuring. Cities reacted in chaos. Power grids failed as frequencies spiked. The air itself hummed at low frequencies that made buildings vibrate. Animals went silent. Deep in the oceans, whales began migrating in circles, emitting strange, low-pitched songs that repeated at regular intervals. The world had become an instrument, and the structure above was playing it. For weeks, humanity teetered between awe and madness. The object never attacked, never communicated. It simply watched. Scientists worked day and night to decode the signals embedded in its light pulses. One team from Kyoto claimed to have found patterns, numerical sequences repeating in prime intervals, matching the same structures found in Atlas's dust trail. They proposed a terrifying theory. Each of the previous objects had been transmitters, and this one was the receiver. Everything that had come before, the light, the dust, the silence, had been preparation. Now the system was complete. The network was live. If that was true, it meant Earth wasn't the destination. It was the relay. The structure wasn't here to talk to us. It was using us to talk to something else. That realization shattered whatever remained of human confidence. How do you process the idea that your entire planet might be a node in a cosmic machine? That every signal, every pulse, every frequency might not be for you, but through you? Scientists who had devoted their lives to rationality began breaking down on live broadcasts. Philosophers wrote manifestos trying to explain existence in the shadow of a presence no one could define. Even the skeptics fell silent. There was nothing left to deny. Then, without warning, The rhythm changed. The 11-hour cycle shortened. The pulses grew faster, louder, brighter. Each wave made the sky ripple faintly, as if the air itself were vibrating. The auroras became visible across the entire globe, painting the horizon in bands of red, violet, and white. The structure was no longer passive. It was speaking. But to who? Satellites recorded bursts of energy radiating outward into deep space. The signals weren't random, they were directional, focused. When decoded, they contained structured intervals that resembled data transmission. For days, every dish on Earth listened as the structure above transmitted something vast and incomprehensible into the void. It wasn't a message, it was a download, the kind of transmission that could carry the sum of a civilization's history. And then, abruptly, it stopped. The silence that followed was worse than the light. Instruments showed no readings, no pulses. The object's glow dimmed, fading until it was nothing more than a ghostly outline against the stars. For a few fleeting hours, people thought it was over, that whatever it had come to do was finished. But then the lights came back, not from space but from Earth. Across the planet, certain regions began to glow faintly, visible even from orbit. Cities went dark while the oceans shimmered with faint lattice patterns, geometric ripples of luminescence spreading across thousands of miles. The same shapes seen in Atlas's dust, the same fractal geometry once recorded in Oumuamua's light curves. The message wasn't over. It had simply moved to its next medium. Those who were awake that night described a sensation unlike anything they had ever felt. The air vibrated, not loud, but deep enough to be felt in the bones. Electronic devices flickered on and off. Radios emitted a low hum that seemed to pulse in time with the light. Some people claimed to hear voices within it, whispers layered beneath the resonance, speaking in tones that weren't quite human but weren't mechanical either. A language made of emotion, not sound. Then came the moment that no one could explain. At 0342 UTC, every clock on Earth, digital, atomic, mechanical, stopped for exactly 1 second. The entire planet paused. Power grids froze, heart monitors flatlined, GPS satellites lost sync, and when time resumed, the object above was gone, vanished. No explosion, no departure trail, no trace of acceleration. It simply ceased to exist, leaving behind only an afterimage burned into the night sky, a faint circular void where stars refused to shine. In the days that followed, the world struggled to return to normal, but normal no longer existed. The readings taken during the event revealed something impossible. The Earth's rotation had shifted by a fraction of a second. It wasn't catastrophic, but it was measurable. The planet had been touched, altered. Some argued it was coincidence, others believed it was intentional, a calibration. When the dust settled, literally and figuratively, one final discovery emerged. Hidden in the radio noise recorded during the event was a sequence, a string of pulses encoded across multiple frequencies. When converted into binary, it formed a repeating numerical pattern. No beginning, no end, just infinite eights, looping forever. Mathematically, it was meaningless. Symbolically, it was everything. In ancient cultures, 8 represented infinity, rebirth, continuity. To scientists, it was simply an endless loop, a system that had closed upon itself. The meaning was clear enough. The countdown hadn't ended, it had reset, and somewhere far beyond the stars, something answered. The light was gone, but it never really left. Even weeks after the disappearance, people said the sky still looked different. The stars seemed sharper, closer, almost alive, as if the universe had exhaled and forgotten to inhale again. The air felt thicker, heavy, compasses still drifted, and the faint hum that had haunted the planet for months lingered just below the threshold of hearing. Most people pretended it wasn't there, but once you noticed it, you couldn't unhear it. It was everywhere, in the wind, in the power lines, in the quiet moments before sleep. A ghost frequency humming like the Earth's new heart. Governments declared victory over uncertainty, calling the event a transient cosmic anomaly. The phrase repeated across every news outlet, every official statement, every carefully staged interview, but the public didn't believe it. How could they? The world had stopped for a second, every clock, every machine, every pulse. 1 billion people had felt that moment. A silence so deep it left a mark. You can't explain that away with press releases. You can't name it and make it smaller. Humanity had seen something vast and deliberate, and now it had to live with the memory. In the weeks that followed, normal life tried to resume, but it was like restarting a song after the final note had already played. Power grids came back, satellites rebooted, and the internet limped online again. But something intangible had shifted. People stopped arguing about politics. They stopped pretending they were in control of anything. Crime rates dropped, not out of morality but exhaustion. The collective noise of humanity had been replaced by an uneasy quiet, like the pause between lightning and thunder, when everyone waits for the sound that never comes. Science was the first casualty. The world's greatest minds gathered in emergency conferences, but the more they analyzed the data, the less sense it made. The readings from the structure, those radiant pulses, the synchronized electromagnetic distortions, the global resonance, none of it followed known physics. The energy output was infinite, yet untraceable. The object hadn't emitted radiation, but it had altered matter. Its presence had rewritten reality in ways instruments could detect, but not define. One researcher from CERN described it best when he said, "We have the fingerprints, but not the hand." Theories spread like wildfire. Some claimed the structure had been a form of artificial intelligence, an ancient cosmic mechanism that activated once the planet reached a certain technological threshold. Others argued it was a test, a calibration, a way of taking inventory of intelligent life. And then there were the darker interpretations, the idea that the event wasn't over, that humanity had been integrated into a network far beyond comprehension. The phrase "the integration" became common in online forums, whispered like a secret religion. What unsettled scientists most was what didn't happen. There were no visible remnants, no radiation signatures, no trace elements, but every piece of technology, from cell phones to supercomputers, had been subtly altered. Their internal clocks no longer synced perfectly with atomic time. They drifted, not randomly, but according to a repeating pattern, exactly 8.8 milliseconds per day. That number didn't match any known astronomical constant. It was as if every digital system on Earth had been quietly retuned to a new frequency. The discovery triggered panic within intelligence agencies. If an external force could alter every machine simultaneously, what else could it do? Could it manipulate data, communication, even thought? For months, governments treated the phenomenon as a cybersecurity threat, searching for viruses or hidden transmissions. But there was nothing to find. The change wasn't in the code, it was in the clockwork of the world itself. Meanwhile, strange reports began to surface from across the globe. In isolated regions, deserts, oceans, mountaintops, people claimed to see faint geometric lights rippling across the sky, like the afterimage of something vast moving just beyond vision. Seismographs picked up rhythmic tremors deep within the Earth, perfectly synchronized with the 11-hour cycle. Animals behaved oddly, migrating toward magnetic anomalies or gathering in silent groups, as if waiting for something. Even the weather seemed affected, patterns repeating every 8 days, cycles looping with eerie precision. And then came the dreams. At first, only a few people mentioned them. Vivid visions of structures made of light, endless corridors, and voices that spoke in tones rather than words. But within weeks, millions began to report the same experience. They described floating through vast lattice shapes, seeing patterns of impossible geometry, feeling emotions that didn't belong to them. Scientists dismissed it as mass psychogenic disorder, collective trauma manifesting as shared dreams. But the consistency was too perfect across languages, cultures, and continents. The imagery was identical. The dreams always ended the same way: a pulse of light, a flash, and a number. When neurologists studied the brain activity of people reporting these dreams, they found something extraordinary. During REM sleep, their neural oscillations aligned to a frequency that matched the Earth's new electromagnetic resonance. In essence, the planet itself had entered their minds, or perhaps they had entered its. Whatever the truth was, the boundary between human consciousness and the environment had blurred. Humanity had become a receiver for something it didn't understand. Governments tried to suppress the findings, but the information leaked as it always does. Within months, entire subcultures formed around the phenomenon. Some saw it as evolution, the next phase of human awareness. Others saw it as invasion, but for most it was simply proof that life had changed forever. The Earth was no longer silent. It had been activated. In the ruins of old institutions, new movements arose. Scientists abandoned their labs to form independent research collectives, seeking to understand the new physics that had emerged. Theories of resonant consciousness and planetary synchronization replaced traditional cosmology. Music took on a strange spiritual role. Composers began creating symphonies based on the measured frequencies of the Earth's pulse. Even architecture changed, with cities designing buildings that reflected harmonic proportions from the object's geometry. Humanity was remaking itself in the image of what it had seen, but not everyone adapted. Some broke under the weight of it. Mental health crises skyrocketed. People couldn't sleep, couldn't think, couldn't separate themselves from the sense of isolation that had once defined human existence was gone, replaced by an overwhelming awareness of connection to everything, everywhere, all at once. For some it was enlightenment, for others madness. Years passed, and still the mystery deepened. The Lagrange event, as historians later called it, became the dividing line of human history. The moment before and after humanity understood it was not the center of anything. Children born after the event were different. Sensitive to electromagnetic fields, they often described hearing the music of the sky. Many displayed an instinctive understanding of mathematics and pattern recognition that defied explanation. Geneticists found nothing unusual, but neurologists disagreed. The structure of their brains showed faint differences in synaptic alignment, subtle, rhythmic variations that matched the same 8.8 millisecond cycle embedded in the planet's systems. It was as if the event had rewritten evolution in real time. The world never received another signal. No more objects came, no lights, no return of the lattice. But no one truly believed it was over. Humanity had been measured, mapped, and perhaps claimed. The silence that followed was not comfort, it was waiting. Decades later, when historians tried to describe what had happened, they struggled to find language for it. Some called it an awakening, others called it a harvest. But the truth was simpler and more terrifying. Humanity had been seen, and once you are seen by the universe, you can never go unseen again. Even now, on quiet nights, when the world goes still and the noise of civilization fades, some swear they can still hear it, the faint hum, the pulse, the rhythm that started it all. 11 hours, 42 minutes, 8.8 seconds, the heartbeat of something far beyond comprehension, echoing through the bones of a planet that once thought it was alone. And if you listen closely enough, really listen, you might hear it too. Not from the sky, but from inside yourself. Because maybe it was never out there to begin with. Maybe it was always here, waiting for us to finally notice. It didn't happen overnight. Nothing ever truly does. The world didn't rebuild with trumpets or declarations or flags planted in the ashes of fear. It began quietly, like dawn itself, slow, pale, uncertain, creeping across the ruins of the old world until people realized morning had arrived. They called it the New Dawn, not because it was brighter, but because it was different. Humanity had awakened to the vastness of existence, and for the first time understood that survival was not the same as purpose. In the years after the Lagrange event, Earth entered a strange peace. Borders softened, armies shrank, and economies dissolved into something simpler, not because of revolution, but resignation. What was the point of conquest when the sky itself had reminded everyone how small they truly were? The nations that had once fought over resources now traded knowledge instead. Space programs merged, forming a single initiative known simply as the Continuum. It wasn't a government, not exactly, more like a shared vow among the surviving scientific institutions to keep looking, to keep listening, to never stop reaching outward. But the outward gaze was only half the story. Something else had changed. Something inward. The hum that had once haunted the planet became a kind of constant companion. Entire branches of science emerged around it. Resonant physics, harmonic biology, electrosomatic consciousness. The idea that everything from brainwaves to magnetic fields was connected by unseen rhythms became more than philosophy. It was measurable. The same pulse that had rippled through the planet during the event still existed, faint but persistent, threading through every living system. The Earth wasn't just alive, it was synchronized. Children born after the event, the resonants as they came to be called, could sense these rhythms instinctively. They navigated by them, dreamed in them, sometimes even spoke in tones that followed the harmonic patterns embedded in the atmosphere. To older generations, they seemed alien. To themselves, they felt perfectly normal. A new kind of human was emerging, one more attuned to the hidden frequencies of existence, one that saw the universe not as a cold expanse, but as a living field of communication. Cities began to transform. Concrete towers gave way to structures that resonated with the planet's frequency, curved surfaces, geometric patterns, materials designed not just for efficiency but for harmony. Power came not from fossil fuels or nuclear fission, but from resonance generators, machines that drew energy from the Earth's electromagnetic pulse. The technology was not discovered but decoded, inspired by the mathematical residue left in the data from the Lagrange event. Humanity hadn't invented the future. It had remembered it. Religion, too, changed, or rather dissolved into something more fluid. The old gods didn't vanish, but they evolved. Temples became observatories. Prayers turned into frequencies. People no longer sought answers from above, but tried to tune themselves into alignment with what they called the continuum. It wasn't a deity, not exactly, but a recognition of connection, the idea that existence itself was one great conversation. Scientists called it resonance, mystics called it communion. To everyone else, it simply felt like peace, but peace has a shadow. Beneath the harmony, unease lingered. No one forgot that the hum had come from somewhere, that the object had not simply appeared but arrived. The question of why remained unanswered. The continuum worked tirelessly to analyze the signals that had been transmitted during the event, hoping to find meaning. Decades of research produced no translation, only deeper mysteries. Some believed the transmission wasn't meant for us at all. Others feared it was an invitation, or worse, a summoning. Still, life went on. The planet healed. Forest returned where cities once burned. Oceans cleared. The electromagnetic fields, once chaotic, stabilized into rhythmic cycles that aligned with the Earth's rotation. Humanity had learned to live within the song of its own planet, not against it. They called this new era the synchrony. It was an age of balance, fragile, imperfect, but real. And yet, beneath the surface, anomalies began to appear. Small, at first, a flicker in satellite data, a rhythmic distortion in the polar auroras, vibrations that didn't match the planetary frequency. The scientists of the continuum dismissed them as natural variations until they noticed something impossible. The pattern wasn't random, it was counted. Every 8.8 days, a faint pulse echoed through the magnetosphere, not from within the planet, but from somewhere just beyond it. It was weak, distant, like an echo returning from the edge of memory, but it was undeniably structured. And worse, it was growing stronger. For the resonant children, the pulse wasn't abstract. They felt it. Some described it as a vibration in the bones, others as a whisper in the mind, a calling that came during dreams, pulling their thoughts toward the stars. Teachers began to notice patterns in their behavior. The children were drawing shapes, fractal geometries identical to those recorded in the structure's lattice decades earlier. None of them could explain how they knew, they simply said it felt right. The Continuum convened an emergency summit, the first since the event. The old scientists, now grey and hollow-eyed, gathered with the new generation to analyze the signal. Data from satellites confirmed the truth no one wanted to speak aloud. The pulse was following the same approach vector as Oumuamua, Atlas, and the Lagrange object. The line through the stars, the corridor, was active again. Something else was coming. But this time humanity didn't panic. The old fear was gone, replaced by something different: curiosity, reverence. The Continuum decided to prepare not defenses, but invitations. They constructed orbital platforms tuned to the planet's resonance frequency, designed to amplify the Earth's own electromagnetic field outward. It was not a weapon, but a reply. Humanity was answering. When the day came, there were no riots, no hysteria. People gathered in open spaces, calm, waiting. The sky remained quiet for hours, until just as the sun began to rise, the auroras appeared again, ribbons of light unfurling across the horizon, pulsing in perfect rhythm with the planet's heartbeat. Then a single tone filled the air, deep, steady, unmistakable, the same tone that had haunted humanity for generations. Every resonant child lifted their head at once, eyes unfocused, as though listening to something only they could hear. And then they spoke, not in words but in harmony, their voices blending into a sound so pure it made the air vibrate. Across the world, machines powered down, lights dimmed, oceans stilled. The entire planet had fallen into resonance. The Continuum's instruments recorded a single data spike of unimaginable magnitude. A pulse so vast it saturated every frequency, every wavelength, every measurable form of energy. For one blinding instant, every human on Earth shared the same thought, the same feeling, an overwhelming sense of presence. Not alien, not divine, just aware. And then, silence. When the world awoke, the hymn was gone. The sky was empty. The resonant children slept peacefully, their heartbeats steady, synchronized. The data from the continuum showed one final signal transmitted outward, a repeating numerical sequence, the same code that had marked the end of the last era. But this time, it didn't feel like an ending. It felt like a response. Humanity had become part of something vast, not conquered, not observed, but connected. The universe was no longer a mystery to be solved. It was a dialogue, and Earth had finally learned how to speak. For centuries, humans had looked to the stars asking, "Are we alone?" The new dawn had given them an answer far more profound. They were never alone. They had simply never been listening on the right frequency. Now they were. And somewhere far beyond the reach of light, something listened back. They thought the silence would last forever. After the final resonance, when the hum vanished and the skies went still, humanity entered a quiet that felt sacred. The continuum declared the synchrony complete, the age of unity between Earth and the cosmos. For the first time in recorded history, the world had no wars, no borders, no hunger. People lived in harmony with their planet, powered by the pulse they once feared. The resonant generation led the new world, their understanding of frequency and consciousness shaping every aspect of life. Cities floated on magnetic fields. Energy flowed through the air like breath, and for a fleeting moment, it seemed as though humanity had reached the end of its story, not extinction but equilibrium. But equilibrium is never still. The universe does not rest. It oscillates. And so in the heart of that silence, the next sound was born. It began on the 12th anniversary of the final pulse. A faint, almost imperceptible vibration rippled through the global power grid, not strong enough to disrupt, but enough to be noticed. Resonance sensors in the Continuum Central Observatory detected a fluctuation in the electromagnetic spectrum at precisely 8.8 Hz, the frequency that had defined the event. The readings were subtle at first, dismissed as interference, until the same pattern repeated 12 hours later, and again 12 after that. The rhythm was familiar, too familiar. The pulse had returned. The continuum convened immediately. The resonant leaders sat in a circle within the orbital array, their eyes glowing faintly with the biosynaptic implants that allowed them to perceive frequencies beyond normal human range. They listened in silence as the pattern unfolded across the solar system. It wasn't just Earth this time. Every planet, every moon, every satellite registered the same oscillation. The entire system was vibrating in sync, like an orchestra tuning before a concert that had no conductor. At first, the scientists believed it was a natural echo, the residue of the event finally fading through space. But as the amplitude grew, so did the structure within the signal. The harmonics began to split, forming layers upon layers of frequencies, intertwining in perfect mathematical ratios. It wasn't noise, it was architecture, a design made of sound. Then came the discovery that changed everything. A deep space probe orbiting Jupiter detected a light anomaly, a faint distortion just beyond the planet's magnetosphere. When analyzed, the light showed patterns identical to those recorded during the Lagrange event. The structure wasn't physical yet, but it was forming. The energy field was assembling itself atom by atom, photon by photon, condensing from radiation into matter. It was being built. The continuum realized the unthinkable. The signal wasn't a message. It was a blueprint. The object, whatever it was, wasn't sent to Earth. It was grown from Earth's own resonance. The pulses humanity had transmitted at the new dawn had been received, replicated, and now returned, carrying within them the seed of construction. The universe was building something back. At first the formation was invisible, hidden in the radiation belt beyond Jupiter. But as weeks passed, the anomaly expanded, refracting sunlight in ways that created faint spectral rings visible even from Earth. Astronomers observed impossible behavior, the rings pulsing at harmonic intervals, shifting between light and dark in patterns that resemble data compression. The object was encoding itself into visibility, revealing only what the human eye could comprehend. The resonant children, now adults, began to dream again. They reported visions of colossal shapes unfolding in the void, like origami made of starlight. In their sleep, they spoke fragments of numbers, repeating the same sequence. When translated into frequency, the numbers matched the modulation pattern of the anomaly. Somehow, their minds were connected to it. They were hearing it before it arrived. The continuum debated whether to interfere. Some argued humanity should send another reply to show they understood, that they were ready. Others warned that interference could disrupt the process, that humanity was not the architect, but the material. The discussion ended when the object's trajectory became clear. It was moving, not toward Earth this time, but toward the Sun. At first, panic threatened to return, but the resonance reassured the world. They claimed the structure wasn't hostile. It wasn't approaching for destruction, but integration. Their intuition, if it could still be called that, told them the process was part of something larger, something cyclical. Humanity wasn't being tested, it was being completed. Still, as the anomaly approached the Sun, phenomena began to occur that no one could explain. Solar activity increased exponentially, but without chaos. Flares erupted in precise intervals, each releasing electromagnetic waves synchronized with the pulse. The Sun was responding, as though recognizing a signal from its own reflection. The light from those flares carried structured data. When decoded, it formed the same geometric lattice that had defined the Lagrange object. The realization came slowly, then all at once. The structure being built near Jupiter wasn't independent. It was a mirror, a second lattice, meant to align with the first. The Sun was the connection point, the center of the resonance field. Whatever was being constructed, it wasn't just another visitor. It was the completion of a system that spanned from Earth to the stars. And then it began. For 3 days, every electromagnetic instrument on Earth recorded the same phenomenon, a rise in frequency so steep it defied theoretical limits. The resonance climbed past radio, past gamma, past any measurable spectrum, until it reached a point where instruments failed entirely. To human senses, it was silence, but to the resonance, it was symphony. They gathered in cities and deserts and oceans, eyes closed, bodies trembling with the vibration. Some smiled, some wept. A few simply vanished, their atoms dissolving into flickering light. The continuum's final transmission described the phenomenon in a single line. Convergence has begun. No one knows exactly what happened next. The records that survive describe light blinding, infinite, stretching across the sky until the stars themselves disappeared. For a moment, Earth had no shadow. The Sun's brilliance became total, merging night and day into one seamless horizon. Then came the pulse. Not 11 hours this time, but one, a single heartbeat that shook the fabric of space-time itself. Every planet aligned perfectly along a straight line, a configuration so precise it should have been impossible. Gravity bowed, time fractured, and then, like the final chord of a song too vast for any ear, the universe exhaled. When the light faded, the sky was different. The constellations were wrong. The moon's orbit had shifted slightly. But more than that, something had changed in perception itself. People began to see patterns in the stars, not random points, but lines, arcs, connections. The night sky was no longer empty. It was a map, a living lattice stretching across infinity. The resonance disappeared from public life soon after. Some said they ascended, others believed they simply became part of the signal itself. But before they vanished, they left behind a single message, burned into the continuum's central array. The song continues, and indeed, it did. Across the cosmos, radio telescopes detected repeating bursts of structured energy emanating from beyond the solar system, each one carrying fragments of the Earth's resonance signature. The signal had been reborn, not as a call for contact, but as part of an endless conversation between creation and consciousness. Humanity had not met its gods, nor its destroyers. It had met its reflection, the echo of its own awakening cast across the universe. The objects that had once been feared were not messengers or machines. They were mirrors, catalysts designed to awaken any civilization capable of hearing the pulse. The cycle was universal, infinite, recursive. Oumuamua had been the whisper. Atlas had been the question. The Lagrange object had been the answer. And the signal reborn was the memory, a reminder that the universe doesn't speak in words. It sings. Generations later, when the descendants of the resonance finally took to the stars, they found others, worlds that pulsed with the same rhythm, civilizations that had undergone their own synchronies. Each one different, yet familiar, each one part of the same infinite symphony, and in that realization humanity finally understood the universe had never been silent. We had simply been deaf. Now, we were part of the song. In the end, there was no ending. Just a silence that wasn't empty and a light that never fully went away. The world didn't collapse, and it didn't ascend. It simply changed quietly, permanently, like a song fading into the distance, still echoing even when you can no longer hear the notes. Humanity had searched for answers among the stars, only to find that the stars had been asking the same question all along. The story of Oumuamua, Atlas, and the Lagrange object wasn't a trilogy of encounters. It was one conversation stretched across centuries between existence and awareness, and humanity had finally learned to listen. The resonance became myths, their names half remembered, their message scattered through archives and frequencies, but their legacy remained in the rhythm of the world, in the hum of the Earth's pulse, in the way the auroras still shimmered faintly at midnight, in the quiet sense that something was always watching, always listening. People no longer feared the unknown. They had become part of it. The children of the new dawn grew up without the concept of isolation. To them, the stars weren't distant suns, but living patterns, notes in a cosmic melody that extended far beyond comprehension. Centuries passed, but the story never faded. The old recordings of the first signals, the grainy footage of the glowing dust from Atlas, the last transmission from the continuum, they became sacred texts, studied not as history, but as scripture. Humanity stopped worshipping gods that looked like themselves and began to honor the rhythm that connected everything. Science became faith, and faith became science. The divide that once separated knowledge from wonder had dissolved completely. When the first ships of the new continuum left the solar system, they carried no weapons, no flags, no declarations. They carried resonance, the encoded pulse of Earth itself, the frequency of home. They didn't travel to conquer, they traveled to harmonize, and when they reached other worlds, they found what they had always suspected, that life in its infinite forms sang the same song in different keys. Each planet, each species, each consciousness was a verse in the same eternal composition. From that realization came peace, not the fragile kind that comes from treaties or fear, but the deep, resonant peace that comes from belonging. Humanity was no longer a question mark floating in an indifferent void. It was a note in the orchestra of everything, and in that truth, all the terror, all the confusion, all the desperate searching that had once defined existence became something simple: gratitude. Because in the end, the great mystery wasn't what waited beyond the stars. It was the realization that the stars themselves were alive, that every light in the sky was a heartbeat, and that humanity's own pulse had joined theirs. The universe had never been silent. It had always been singing. We just needed the courage to stop shouting long enough to hear it.